The small town used to be a quiet and peaceful place, but that night the crown prince escaped and the locals were eager for the duchess's victory. There was real chaos here. The knights were going to burn the castle and leave no one alive. In this castle, there was the main character who looked in horror at what was happening through the window and understood that these people would soon appear here. Suddenly in the castle, she heard loud cries for help, which seemed to come from the next room, and asked for salvation. The main character's name was Harper Lupern, but suddenly the screams stopped and there was complete silence in the palace. The doors of her room opened and power fell into the hands of Callista Lupern, who had just declared her victory. Harper sat on the floor. She understood perfectly well that at any second a terrible fate could await her. She looked at the girl in armor and in a frightened, trembling voice admitted that they had not seen their sister for too long. A sweet, fair-haired girl with sky-blue eyes named Harper Lupern was the most powerful person in the entire empire. The girl was the second daughter of the Duke of Lupern, who inherited the high title and the respectful esteem of every inhabitant of the empire. They had a strong alliance with the crown prince, the incarnation of the empire's founder named Glein. Harper was also his fiancé, and in appearance this young man was an absolutely perfect person. But there was one thing. In fact, her life was terrible, and as the child of a servant, she was nothing but a nuisance to her sister Callista. Therefore, each time the sister tried to get rid of her relative at the first opportunity, and the girl was poisoned more than once. One day, the heroine ran away from her villainous sister and, thanks to her engagement to the prince, her life changed. But this young man didn't exactly love her. His only goal was to get rid of the Duke, and above all, this man was a vicious instigator of battles. Glein personally killed the emperor and then ascended to the throne, and no one could stop the cruelty of this man. But even he always felt unsafe inside the palace, and his fears were instantly proven true. Glein's brutal tyranny eventually led to the rebellion of the empire's inhabitants, and this is where the exciting story begins. As a result, Glein was killed in his own palace, and his bride met the killer in her room and congratulated him on his victory. She knew it was probably a pointless question, and at that moment she was sure the same fate awaited her. Callista, in knightly armor, stood before her sister, who was ready to die at her hands at that very second. Harper welcomed the new ruler and said it was time to get rid of her as soon as possible. She even bowed to her sister, with respect and dignity as etiquette required, since it was now Callista who was the ruler. But the sister was in no hurry to kill her, and said that she had only one question left that she wanted an answer to. The letter Harper wrote detailed the crown prince's strategy, the extent of his power, and even the secret passage through which he planned to escape. And now Callista wanted to know why her sister helped her kill her own husband by framing him. All this was only for the empire. After the sister became a duchess, the family's estates became more prosperous and all the residents loved her. Harper was well aware that her sister would become a good empress, and under her rule the country, which had been ruined, would again become a prosperous kingdom. Harper considered herself the person her sister hated, but she was right about one thing. She had nowhere to go after leaving the palace because of her engagement. If Harper had not met the crown prince and had remained in the palace, the rebellion could have been avoided. But at that moment, the heroine wanted to live, not survive, which is why she had to act this way. In the end, it turned out the way it did, and it is quite possible that the sisters simply could not exist in parallel. So Harper was sure that Callista had to kill her right now to put an end to her miserable life forever. Harper pointed the sword towards herself and declared that she was ready to die at the hands of her older sister so that the fighting would finally end. Callista stood silently, listening to her sister, and it seemed as if she had no intention of killing her now. Harper wanted to be honest with her sister and asked her why she was doing this and if it really mattered. But for Callista, many things had not mattered for a long time, and even her own sister seemed like an unnecessary puzzle in her life. After hearing the lady's words, the sister swung her sharp sword to finally kill Harper as she asked. The heroine closed her eyes and mentally prepared herself to die right here at the hands of her older sister, and Callista killed instantly and almost painlessly, and perhaps this was the first and last pity on her part. The heroine was sure she was dead, but suddenly she heard a voice. Not understanding why her dead body could not be left alone. She just wanted to lie there breathless, but this pleasant voice seemed familiar to her and called her by name. When Harper opened her eyes, she saw a worried maid in front of her who thought the lady was not feeling well. The maid's name was Jenna, but Harper remembered that she had gotten married 5 years ago, had left the house long ago, and the heroine could not understand whether the maid had died with her. Jenna placed her hand on Harper's forehead carefully and thought that she just had a fever and that was why she was talking nonsense. Somehow her touch felt so real, and Harper had no idea what was going on. She looked around and realized that she was lying in her cozy, soft bed, but just a couple of seconds ago, splashes of blood from her lifeless body were flying in all directions. Everything that was happening seemed to be real, and even caring Jenna stood with her little mistress. Looking at her hands, the heroine realized that she had woken up and become a girl, screaming how old she was. Jenna happily told that just 3 days ago the lady turned 8 years old, and they celebrated her birthday wonderfully. Harper screamed in surprise as soon as she found out that she had been reborn as an 8-year-old girl. Jenna showed the number 8 on her fingers and asked if 3 whole days had already passed, and the lady still couldn't believe it. The heroine felt a strong surge of pressure from such unexpected information, because just a couple of minutes ago she was a completely different age. After a terrible uprising, the heroine was killed by her own sister and finally died, but suddenly woke up in a new body. Harper was in real shock, and this meant only one thing miraculously: the heroine had returned 10 years ago. The crown princess for the tyrant Glyne, who was eventually killed by the enemy and her own sister. But Harper was not destined to finish this story, so now she stood in a soft pink dress in the body of an 8-year-old child. Even the ruler of the empire cannot approach the Grand Duke of Lupern, and then 2 candidates laid claim to the throne. The first candidate was Callista Lupern. She was the daughter of the Duke and his first wife, Lucille. Callista has had an outstanding appearance since childhood. She is skilled in combat, a talented person showing genius as if in magic. The Duke was divorced from Lucille, and he disliked Callista because she looked incredibly similar to his ex-wife. That's why a second daughter was born, a lady with wavy hair and porcelain skin named Harper. She was the daughter of a servant who had an affair with the Duke. But this news was too unexpected for the Duke. Nothing like this had ever happened in the Lupern family, and it was the first unseemly incident that had disgraced the Duke's honor. He was going to acknowledge an illegitimate child, especially one born from some servant. As soon as the Duke saw the newborn girl for the first time, he immediately realized that this was his child. Baby Harper, born to a servant, had no title and her fate was doomed. Looking at the Duke with her tiny eyes, the little girl felt incredible anger emanating from him. He took the baby in his arms and asked if he really had to marry the mother of this child, and at that time her father looked like a scumbag. But soon he even married a servant to recognize his daughter as an official representative of the palace, and to others he must have seemed magnanimous. The Duke was even dubbed a man with a kind heart as soon as he officially announced the birth of his second daughter, Lady Harper. The little girl grew up in the ducal house, having no idea what future awaited her. The Duke always said the girl was nothing like him except for her face, and he always wondered why Harper was just like her mother, an ordinary commoner. Harper was never really her father's child, and the relationship in the family was just terrible. Her father used her to buy time, and he thought about creating another successor, but the Duke did not succeed, and the older sister constantly looked after the girl. All this time, it was incredibly difficult for the little girl to live in an unloved family under close supervision. It is at the very moment when you give up everything that a new, unpredictable, and happy life is usually granted. Perhaps in this life, Harper will die again at the hands of her sister after her father lost power in her past life. The surrounding sages tried to stop Callista, and the Duke claimed that she was the successor he truly wanted. In the end, the girl's fate was still sealed, and one day she met the most cruel man in her life. This gave Glyne, who was eager to get his hands on the Duke's house, an excuse to sneak in there unnoticed. And after all this, the very event that was known from the very beginning occurred when Callista killed her sister with her own hands. After her rebirth, Harper sat in a comfortable chair and tried to figure out what she should do to avoid a cruel fate. This definitely couldn't happen again, and the girl didn't want to die like that twice, completely stupidly and senselessly. Leaving behind such a beautiful picture, she never really liked it in her past life. Jenna approached the baby and said it was almost time for dinner, and Harper tried to remember how she lived in the Duke's house. Perhaps it was a side effect of being reborn, and she tried to remember, being sure that this was the time of year she usually spent alone. The current Callista will be at the Imperial Academy during her last semester, and her father was originally very busy and had no time to take care of his daughter. Harper suddenly realized that she just wanted to live out the rest of her life alone like this, while Jenna served ground beans for dinner. The girl was very hungry and tried the new dish, but before she could chew it, tears almost started flowing from her eyes. Jenna asked to spit out the food as quickly as possible, and for some reason she was now incredibly excited. The maid understood that the girl was probably very hungry, but she asked to wait a little and was going to bring some bread. At that moment, Harper, chewing beans, finally remembered a very interesting thought. She was also a candidate for succession, she was never given proper food, and her father was not merciful to his daughter. Once, Jenna even stole a couple of loaves of bread for the girl, and Harper understood that even if there was a threat of death, she would not be able to survive on such a diet. But now was not the time to just sit and enjoy the view, because the heroine was determined to change her destiny. Jenna reported that there should have been black bread in the box she packed yesterday, and remembering all the details, Harper didn't understand whether it was worth repeating this life again. The maid asked the girl to be a little patient, but she understood that the lady would not do everything just because of her whim. So the brave little girl ran to the kitchen herself and brought some black bread, and now she needed to become independent. After some time, the aroma of chocolate and nut cakes filled the room. Harper didn't expect the chocolate flavor to be so rich, and it was a triple chocolate muffin. She offered Jenna a piece. The muffin was incredibly tasty, but it would probably be worth explaining where the girl got the food from. In her past life, Harper thought her sister was bullying her because she just didn't like her. Holding loaves of black bread in her hands, the little girl stopped and thought, because now she knew a lot. Her sister, if she wanted, would have cut off her head instead of engaging in such petty bullying, and that means someone else is to blame. Standing in the kitchen, the little girl turned to the maids and asked them to call the chef, saying that she urgently needed to tell her something. The chef was busy at the moment, and the maid offered to pass on a message, inquiring what brought the younger lady into the kitchen. As expected, the kitchen was full of food and supplies, and the chef at the estate was a highly respected man. The maids insisted that it was extremely impolite to burst into the kitchen and distract the chef while he was working, but the little girl insistently demanded to talk. While the maids were trying to explain to the girl that this was not allowed, the chef heard a strange conversation and went into the kitchen. Harper finally saw with her own eyes the man who was responsible for her nutrition. In front of her stood the chef of the estate, who looked at the girl with a nonchalant air. It was he who was the culprit who had replaced her food. If the heroine's memory served her right, this man was a distant relative of her father's third wife, and was gradually appropriating the duchy's property to pay off gambling debts. And the most common method of theft was to replace the girl's food with spoiled food. Because in reality, no one here cared about her, and the chef was outraged at who brought her into the kitchen. The little girl approached the chef, holding in her hands stale loaves of bread that had long since developed mold. She stated that she came to the chef specifically so that he could replace her bread with edible bread. She looked at the cook with menacing eyes, hoping that now he would not be able to ignore her. But from the man's insolent grin, it was clear that he didn't give a damn about the little girl. Suddenly, he asked if the poor lady had really learned nothing during this time. The chef burst out laughing, saying that this is what this bread originally looked like and that it was a very famous dish, with a green center. And if the little girl still doesn't know this, she will definitely be considered an ignoramus who doesn't understand anything about food. The chef continued to look at her with insolent eyes and had no intention of changing the spoiled bread. He simply stated, remembering the girl's mother, it was clear why she was behaving so recklessly. But Harper knew that no matter how badly she was treated, she was the legitimate daughter of a duke because her mother had died as a duchess. And she couldn't believe that some chef dared to openly speak ill of her mother in her presence. The chef continued, if the little girl complains about the bread that the emperor himself loves, what will the subordinate think of her in that case? He asked her to behave with dignity, as befits a lady, and quietly eat this masterpiece with green mold. The impudent grin appeared on the man's face again, and he admitted that no decent servant would ever lie to his mistress. He put his plump hands on the girl's shoulders and asked her never to come to him for such matters again, ordering her to sit quietly in her room. and he warned her that no matter how she tried, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and perhaps her whole life, the bread she ate would not change. The chef threw the girl out the door, and she was still holding loaves of moldy bread in her hands. Of course, this was incredibly irritating to the girl. Some chef had no respect for her title at all. But she decided that she would never allow anyone to treat her like that, and no one would dare talk to her like that again. The chef had said what she wanted to hear, and it remained to be seen which emperor would eat moldy bread. Suddenly, she heard a voice asking the girl to move away, claiming that she was blocking the passage. The maid with red hair and freckles all over her face seemed very familiar to the heroine. The lady looked menacingly at the girl, and it was immediately clear that she was not well disposed towards her, because she was the former maid of Clarice, the stepmother who had tormented Harper all her life. When the maid passed by, the girl smelled a very pleasant, delicious smell, and she became interested in where it came from. The lady was pushing a cart with a tray on which stood a piece of fragrant cake with fresh strawberries. Harper realized that this was exactly what she needed right now. She deliberately ran up to the cart and crashed into it, and the porcelain vase shattered into pieces. The maid was indignant about how she managed to crash into the cart, and the little girl asked for forgiveness, admitting that she simply hadn't eaten, and that's why she felt dizzy. The lady angrily declared that she would definitely report everything to the mistress so that the little girl would not think that she could get away with it so easily. The very moment the maid turned away, the girl took all the cakes and put them in her dress, and she immediately went to her room to finally try the sweets that she had never had before. When she finished the delicious chocolate muffin, that same lady appeared at the door of her room. It was the Duke's third wife, named Clarice Lupern, to whom the maid and the chef had probably already reported everything. As soon as Jenna saw the lady, she immediately began to tremble with fear, because her appearance always inspired horror. The lady approached the little lady and asked if she dared to change her food. And right now, the heroine needed to control herself, because in front of her stood the lady herself, whom she hated incredibly. Gina motioned with her hand for the girl to remain standing and decided to figure it out for herself. Jenna insisted that she had no idea what had happened and that the lady was currently having lunch, but the mistress asked her to be quiet and warned that the maid would soon be punished. She snapped her fingers and turned to another maid to tell her what had happened. The maid, with red hair and an angry look, began to tell what she had told her mistress earlier. Salia stated that she had only stepped away for a moment to prepare the food, while Lady Harper was standing next to the cart at the time. So she was sure that the young lady had touched the lady's food, and Salia had screamed about it throughout the room. There was a bruise on her cheek, but Harper didn't remember hitting the maid with anything when she pushed the cart. It was obvious that the mistress had hit her. She had managed to raise her hand against someone again, and her character remained just as vile. Even though it was a mistake, the lady was incredibly angry that black bread with mold ended up on her table. And once Harper realized all this, she was terribly outraged, because she had eaten such food her entire childhood. Clarissa looked at the girl and did not understand why, instead of showing at least a drop of remorse, she only raised her head higher and higher. The lady asked the maids to immediately take away the girl, who, in her opinion, certainly needed to be taught a lesson. Jenna tried to protect the young lady, but the chef grabbed her hands and squeezed her wrist tightly. The lady approached Harper and, looking menacingly into her eyes, declared that she really dared to touch her food with dirty hands. Clarissa asked if the lady knew how many days she would have to be locked in the room until she finally came to her senses. The mistress always made the girl tremble with fear in this way, and each time she would scream with fury and then lock her up as punishment. Harper was once sure that the villain was tormenting her, that you would most likely please her older sister. But after a few years, Clarice teamed up with her father's younger brother, and after a while, she even tried to kill her older sister. Of course, this attempt was unsuccessful, and the sister, having become a duchess, returned everything back. And Harper no longer wanted to be afraid of the man who would meet such a fate, so she screamed right in the lady's face that she had done wrong. Clarissa was indignant. Did the girl really not think it was a mistake that she tried to force her to eat this garbage? The young lady said that the chef himself called moldy bread a gourmet food, and even the emperor himself adores it. The girl told her version the lady's basket contained only cheap white bread, so she exchanged it for her own. It was the first time Harper had voiced her opinion, and the lady asked the chef if he had actually said those words. Clarissa waited for the chef to respond, and the young lady noticed a strange habit of blinking when she was embarrassed. The chef screamed, This is a complete lie, and he spent a total of 30 years in the kitchen. He certainly could not serve such a dish to the lady's table. The young lady screamed. Her words were true, and everyone in the kitchen heard it, because every day they brought her exactly this kind of moldy bread. The lady was silent, covering her face with a fan, and she was probably thinking about how to further humiliate the girl. It was clear from her look that Clarissa was not going to repent, and that one could only expect together from her in the future. Suddenly she turned to the maid and said, "Jenna is the most suspicious, and did she really dare to steal food for her own benefit?" The lady suggested searching the maid's room right now because she was sure that she would definitely find something. Clarissa warned that if any suspicious items or even one coin of unknown origin were found, Jenna would face punishment. She raised her head proudly and declared that in that case the maid would be called a thief and would be returned from the estate without a penny in her pocket. So Clarissa looked angrily at the girl and asked her to admit her guilt and ask for forgiveness immediately. In this way, the lady decided to show generosity and leave it without consequences, but for the lie she was going to punish young Harper separately. She held the little girl by the shoulder and was sure that she had to confess everything so as not to set up the maid. And Harper just smiled sweetly in response, agreeing to fulfill the mistress's conditions. Jenna and the chef stood there in bewilderment because they were sure that the girl would tell the whole truth right now. But the lady continued to get more and more angry, and a terrible grimace appeared on her face. The little heroine only said, "Well," asking if the lady hadn't just promised to find the one who stole her food. Harper continued to play the mistress's game, and really didn't mind the maid being fired, only if she was really found guilty, asking for the chef to be searched as well. The chef began to sweat, and no one knew whether the food was spoiled from the start or whether it had already spoiled after the Gina. But the maid was completely innocent in this situation, and the mistress simply took out all her anger on her, wanting to make her look like a laughingstock. The lady noticed that the servant was probably standing near the door, and she needed to finish this as soon as possible. She asked Harper not to even dare interfere with the search, because she was the real owner of the estate. But the young lady screamed, "The mistress has no right to accuse the servant if she really has no evidence." Harper continued to insist that this work belonged to the butler Theon and was not at all the work of the mistress of the estate. While the lady was thinking about when the girl had become so impudent, she said with confidence that her upbringing was also Uncle Theon's area of responsibility. Clarissa could not stand it any longer and swung her hand at the young lady, shouting that she was being too presumptuous and contradicting the lady herself. Harper was no longer the petulant little girl, and she stood her ground with pride in front of the villain. Justice prevailed, and the lady was grabbed by the hand by another resident of the estate who unexpectedly appeared. It was the butler Theon who grabbed Clarice by the hand and declared that the young lady's words were absolutely true. The baby was incredibly happy to see Theon because she knew that only he could help her. The gentleman held Clarissa's hand tightly, and she turned angrily towards him. A genius who, being a commoner, graduated with honors from the Imperial Academy, in a year brought the finances of the ducal house into order, and all the businesses he started turned out to be successful. People unanimously called him a cold-blooded, principled man named Theon. Theon asked the lady's permission to start searching in order to finally prove who was right and who was wrong. Even Harper had never seen the lady so confused, because she had not expected the young man to act like that. Unlike Clarice, who is the mistress but only has formal powers, Theon had a decisive voice in the family after the disappearance of his sister and father. In his past life, even his sister, recognizing Theon's abilities, kept him by her side from the very beginning. But now Theon has not yet recognized his sister as his mistress, because this was only the heroine's second life. If you remember his character, in his past life, he did not abuse the baby and treated her like a lady, so Harper got another chance. Now the young lady did not even hope for loyalty and only wanted one of the adults to help her. And Theon was perfect for this role, so Harper begged with pleading eyes that the master would help her at least once. She really wanted the gentleman to understand that she needed the help of an adult to protect herself from the villainous. Surely, she had a chance to become understood by Theon, but so far they had not exchanged a single word. As everyone knows, punishing servants and conducting searches are powers that the Duke delegated specifically to Theon. The young man noted that it seemed like everyone wanted to conduct a search, so he suggested calling the necessary personnel first. Theon pulled the cord that was supposed to work, but to his surprise, it did not summon the servants. Harper said that even if you use the bell in this room, no one will come anyway. It seemed that even the outstanding genius did not expect that the Duke's daughter would live exactly like this, because today he saw everything with his own eyes. The little girl told him that Jenna always brought people herself, and he finally understood how the young lady was treated. But there was a badge hanging on his chest, and Theon only had to press it slightly for his assistants to come to him. It was a very useful brooch, and within a couple of minutes the knights found themselves in the girl's room. He asked for an immediate search of Jenna and Leroy's rooms, warning that if money or items were found, they were to be seized immediately. After completing the task, the knight reported that they searched the suspects' rooms but found nothing. Harper realized, as expected, Leroy was good at hiding money, and of course there was nothing in his room. But Theon was not at all simple, and in this matter he also had his own strengths in interrogation. The young man asked to search all the places in the mansion that they both visit, and to be sure to inspect the rooms of the close maids and kitchen assistants. The lady intervened in the matter, who was against such complications because of the child's false words, and she was sure that it was enough to punish only the child and the maid. Clarissa was having absolutely no luck, and Harper cheerfully stated that they still hadn't found out who the real culprit was. The little heroine was confident that everything would be resolved in her favor and turned to Uncle Theon with one important question. The lady inquired whether the old tower to the west was part of the residence of the venerable Duke. Theon wondered if the lady meant the old building in the corner of the mansion. Strictly speaking, it was also part of the Duke's residence. But he was sure there was no need to search this territory, since entry there had been prohibited for a long time. The chef and the lady watched the girl's words with glee, and did not understand that at any moment their lie could be revealed. Suddenly Harper said that the maid Gina often walks in those places, and they are definitely not prohibited. In this life, the girl was very prepared for such situations because she remembered her past very well. In fact, Gina had never been to those places, but the young lady decided to use her name for a short time. Theon wanted to hear the lady's opinion, asked who she suspected and what was really important to her. For the little girl, the evidence that would be found was important, and whoever is in a position to make decisions must doubt everyone. Theon was very surprised, because this was a completely atypical answer for such a young lady of 8 years. Theon wrote this phrase in his thesis, and when the heroine was held captive by Glyne, there was only one place in the palace where she could get to. It was the library, and thanks to this, she read books written by Theon more than once. The heroine called him for a reason, because she knew this man better than anyone else in this house. The chef realized that his deception could be revealed and shouted loudly, "What does the Western Tower have to do with it?" He insisted that there was no one in the Duke's estate who would dare to set foot in the Western Tower, and that this search was a waste of time. Theon smiled and looked at Leroy, stating that it seemed like the lady also had some thoughts of her own about this. After Harper's statement, Theon ordered an immediate search of the West Tower, and the knights were ready to head there directly. After searching the Western Tower, something was found, namely a box of books, which were immediately reported to Theon. The ledger contained data on food supplies, but they did not match those kept in the kitchen, and gold bars were found in the difference in the figures. All the signatures in the ledger belonged to Leroy Brown. His deception was finally revealed, and the lady could not believe that the chef was such a fool. After this, the chef should have been stripped of his status and kicked out of the estate, which is exactly what happened in his past life. But Leroy fell to his knees before the boy, declaring that the books had clearly been falsified. For such a small amount of money, the chef did a dirty job, and Theon said that in order to take responsibility for the deed, he would have to pay with his head. Harper let out a cry of surprise. She hadn't expected the chef to be facing the death penalty at all, and it was an unexpected turn of events. The knights have also already managed to obtain testimony from the cook's assistant, which will also be taken into account in the case. The assistant admitted that on the orders of the chief, he gave the little lady moldy bread instead of normal food. This didn't happen in one day. This horror had been going on for several years, and Theon found out about it today. The chef had already made a huge mistake by taking the Duke's things for himself, but serving such food to a minor lady was an even greater crime. Vtori was on the side of the little heroine, and she was incredibly happy that the deception was finally revealed. Theon stated that the chef was very lucky that the young lady was still in good health, but she could very well have fainted and become ill. And in that case, the chef would have to take responsibility, But Leroy never even thought about it. The chef sat on the floor and trembled, waiting for the lady to help him somehow, but the lady did not even look in his direction. Theon made it clear that the chef would face the death penalty for such a crime, since the little lady could have died. No matter how sound the plan may be, safety is the most important thing for a chef. The young man felt sorry that the butler's powers did not allow him to take the lives of servants. Theon ordered Leroy's property to be confiscated, both of his arms to be broken, and he to be mercilessly thrown out of the estate forever. The butler is a scientist, which is no small fact, and he also came up with something regarding the chef's severance pay. Theon decided it would be right to reward the chef with the same moldy bread he tried to feed the little girl. Looking at his watch, the butler realized that it had taken much longer than he had expected. The issue would be resolved when His Grace the Duke returned, and he was going to report everything to the lady in detail and asked her to prepare. Clarice was outraged because the butler had just threatened the Duchess, but the young man was simply following the rules. The little lady decided to approach the butler and asked him to give her some time. Harper asked if she asked Theon not to tell his father, he might listen to her and fulfill her request. The lady admitted that she did not want to disturb her father with something that had already been decided, which is why she decided to ask the butler about it. He listened carefully to the girl's request, and if she really wanted it, he was ready to listen to her. Harper felt like there were people in her life who could help her, and she saw protection in the butler. The little heroine managed to find the man who made sure that justice finally prevailed in this estate. She also admitted that she would like to receive a sincere apology from the Duchess for the incident. The lady looked at the girl with a grin, and this expression was familiar to her for a long time. Harper wanted a tough apology. She wanted much more, and asked the Duchess to apologize to the maid. The lady's pride would hardly allow her to apologize to the servants, and as soon as she heard about this, she became furious. She pointed her finger at Jenna and screamed, "Did Harper really want her to beg for forgiveness from some maid?" Jenna assured her that everything was fine, but the heroine understood that if it weren't for Uncle Theon, they would never have seen each other again. Jenna understood the little girl's feelings and tried to calm her down, because the maid was always very worried about her. The butler stated that given the circumstances and everything that had happened, he could do nothing in this situation. And the Duchess will have to apologize, and if she refuses, Theon will be forced to inform his lordship. Theon knew the Duke loved his children, so there shouldn't be any problems, and the Duchess should apologize. Everyone understood that the lady often acted too impulsively and could allow herself to be rude to the servants. But the lady, because of her pride, could not apologize to the maid and did not understand how she had come to this. Even without this, there were rumors that the Duke had a new lover, and this happened quite recently. But she couldn't get into trouble for something like that, and with a trembling voice she was forced to ask Jenna for forgiveness. Having gathered her courage, the lady said these words and asked that from now on the servants be careful and not allow anything like that to happen. The lady barely managed to utter these words, because she had never apologized to a servant before. And this was the first time something like this happened, and Jenna stood in shock at what was happening. There were other maids outside the door who also witnessed this situation, where the lady finally apologized. The little heroine managed to do everything possible to ensure that the lady was punished, and the chef was fired, and now she was incredibly pleased with the result. Now, when the other servants see Gina, they will think of her as the only servant who received an apology from the Duchess. Harper decided to treat the Duchess with caution from now on and not allow frivolity, because now the life of the maid would be much better than before. In this way, the little girl managed to raise the status of the servant, and she was sure that Gina would never abandon her or let her down. Finally, the young lady will be able to say goodbye to feelings, moldy bread, and say goodbye to hot days. After the Duchess finally apologized, she angrily walked out of the room. Harper even laughed that the door almost broke from the Duchess's anger, and the lady was now simply furious. With a sense of accomplishment, he decided to leave, warning her that if the girl needed anything, she could call him at any time. He also fixed the bell rope so that people would never come if the rope was pulled. But the bell rope hung too high, and the young lady did not see how she could reach it. She stood on her toes and tried to reach the rope, but she was too short. Of course, the young lady was much shorter than the other ladies, and her legs were still a bit short. Gina noted that at this age it is important to eat well in order to grow faster, but unfortunately, until now, they did not have this opportunity. The young lady was even a little indignant when she heard Theon's cold-bloodedness and straightforwardness when he called her legs short. Theon replied that since there was no way to lengthen the young lithium's legs, they could simply tie a ribbon to the rope, so that the girl could reach the bell herself and call one of the servants at any time. But Harper had another option, and remembering all of Theon's books she had read, she made one request. From today on, Uncle Theon said she could visit the library anytime. Jenna thoughtfully gave the girl a bottle of water so that she could quench her thirst and not feel the dryness in her throat. Taking the bottle of water, Harper thanked the maid, and after a delicious breakfast, she was in a great mood. Let's go back a day to understand why the young lady was allowed to go to the library at any time. That day, she asked the butler for permission to use the central library, or more precisely, the west wing of the third floor. It was a place where all the knowledge of the Empire, books on witchcraft, ancient magic, and unique maps that could not be found anywhere else were collected. And Harper went there, deciding to find out in advance where Glaine and Callista would fight in the future. The young lady made a survival plan and first decided to find out which regions would survive the battle and slowly steal jewelry from the house and save money. She decided that Klein and her sister could fight as much as they wanted, and she would escape to a safe place. After all, this plan looked perfect. So she asked the butler to fulfill her request and allow her to freely visit the central library. Theon understood that for young ladies there was nothing difficult in visiting the library, but on the third floor one had to know the ancient language in order to read. The young lady was a person who was locked in a library in her past life, and she could read anything. That is why the little girl was allowed to go to the library, and on this day the maid decided to take her there. As she said goodbye, she asked the girl to wait a little, and Harper turned around with interest and looked at Jenna. Suddenly, the maid said that after yesterday she owed a lot to the young lady. Jenna knelt down in front of the girl and confessed that if she hadn't solved Leroy's case, she would have been whipped and thrown out of the house. It all happened only because one ordinary day the girl herself decided to go to the kitchen and give away the moldy bread. Jenna felt guilty, thinking that she should have addressed the issue before the baby went into the kitchen. And in that case, she would never have voiced her complaints, and she would not have had to fight with the impudent chef. So the maid held the little girl's hands and thought that she had not done enough for the girl who had bravely gone to deal with the adults. But now everything was different, and the maid realized this the moment Harper demanded an apology from her mistress on her behalf. Gina, with tears in her eyes, confessed that she was ready to serve the young mistress all her life and would not exchange her for anyone. She promised her oath will never change, and as long as she lives, she will serve her mistress faithfully and devotedly. The young lady had never heard anything like it before, and it was the first oath of allegiance she had ever heard. Jenna was a wonderful maid and a good, kind person with a huge heart, but the girl understood every time that there was a strange distance between them, which sometimes prevented them from communicating. In her past life, the heroine was buried under her misfortune, and Gina had no reason to even risk her life for her, so in the future she married a wizard and left the Duke's estate. Everything was different in this life, and the little girl felt that their relationship had changed compared to the past. Finally, Harper stood up and stopped at the library doors, and with a heavy sigh she tried to open the heavy doors. She pushed the door with both hands, but surprisingly it turned out to be incredibly heavy. The girl was unable to open it right away. The door was definitely not the right size for a child, although Harper was probably the only child in the main building of the Duke's residence. She applied all her strength, and the next moment the door finally began to open. As the little girl pushed the door with all her might, it suddenly opened and the lady flew right onto the threshold of the library. She immediately felt that she was falling, but at that moment a man's hand caught her. And again Mr. Theon came to the rescue, holding the door and saying that the lady had had a noisy day from the very beginning. The butler looked at the girl and asked who she got her eccentricity from, because Harper really was an unusual child. She was delighted to see the butler, but he asked for silence in the library. Harper looked around the library. There was no one there now, and it was probably too early to think that she and the butler had become a little friendly. Theon said that half of the books on the third floor were rare items that couldn't be found anywhere else, and that they couldn't be allowed to come into contact with food particles. He warned her that if she wanted to take out any book, she should first show it to the butler. But suddenly, Theon began to cough loudly. This cough was strange, and the little girl began to worry, asking if everything was okay, sir. Theon asked not to worry and said that he was not sick at all, they only had to go up the stairs. She followed her uncle, but his coughing still did not stop, and with every step he coughed louder. The young lady couldn't help but notice this, and the cough was so strong that it seemed as if the butler was ill with something. If you think about it, the heroine remembered how the butler used to cough a lot, and the same thing happened to him in his past life. And if this doesn't go away in a few years, perhaps the butler has some hidden illness, but he himself just said that he is not sick. When she found the butler behind her, she saw a strange scar on his neck, which immediately caught her attention. Harper found the scar odd, and decided that this information needed to be verified anyway. She turned to her uncle again, asking if this cough was really not that bad, but she only heard a cold answer to her question. The butler said there was no need to worry, and the young lady didn't even have to worry about it. He even turned in her direction and asked the second milady never to ask that question again. The little girl realized that her uncle would probably not answer her, and decided not to say anything more about his cough. She realized that she should figure this out herself, but now there was no point in asking the butler anything. Since she was allowed to use the library, she would no longer have to deal with the gentleman in person. Either way, Theon will become Callista's man again, and someday, on his sister's orders, he will try to take her life in the future. Therefore, the heroine realized that it was not worth wasting her energy in vain, and it was better to look for another way to save her life. The heroes arrived at the west wing of the third floor from the central library of the duchy that the young lady so wanted to visit. The girl looked at the size of the library with admiration, and it was the first time in her life that she had seen anything like this. Also, in her past life, she had never been here before, and the huge number of books was simply incredible. This library was not worth comparing with the library of the Crown Prince. The most valuable copies were kept here. For a moment, Harper wondered if Theon would be useful to her later, to look over the books. The butler promised that he would be there, and he himself suggested that the young lady look around on her own. The little girl firmly decided that now was not the best time to admire the size of the library because she came here on important business. She was going to find one card, and she knew its location from a past life. Stopping near a shelf of books, Harper looked through them carefully and was sure that the map had to be here somewhere. But suddenly something strange happened that made the little girl turn around and wonder at what was happening. She felt as if her legs were completely unresponsive, and a magical force of magic appeared next to her. It was as if the magic was asking the girl to go in a different direction, and the young miss didn't quite understand what it was. Suddenly her body began to move on its own, and a magical power showed her where to go. Harper felt like someone was tugging at her arm, and suddenly she stopped in front of a shelf of books. A magic book in a dark brown cover with golden drawings flew straight into her hands. Harper didn't even have to look for anything, and with a wave of her wand, this book appeared in her hands. The title read, "A Book About Time and Magic," and the little girl read the title with ease. She felt that this particular book was calling her, and Harper had heard that sometimes books retain the magical power of wizards. She attracts people with the right waves, but the little girl was sure that she had no magic at all. Opening the first page of the book, she read something about regression, and even screamed in surprise throughout the entire library. The butler turned around because he heard the girl squeal and looked in her direction in surprise. The magic book somehow found out that the young lady was a real regressor. Perhaps now she will be able to find out the reason why she came back to life after the murder. To reverse time, two things are needed: a legendary stone that existed outside of time and space, and magical power filled with a desire so strong that one could put one's life on the line. But the very existence of a magic stone is already a legend, and even if you are lucky enough to find it, the conditions for its use are difficult to fulfill. Even if all the conditions are met, there will be no fool who would dare to turn back time. But regression means that the memory of the past time also disappears and vice versa. Because of this, the future can also change in a more terrible direction. Harper learned that it was impossible to preserve memory in this way, but for some reason, after rebirth, she remembered everything perfectly. There may be more than one way to regress, which is why Harper retained her full memory. At that moment, the butler suddenly approached her and asked if the young lady really could read the ancient language. Harper only now realized that she was holding a book in her hands, which was written in an ancient language and was quite old. For some reason, the butler looked strangely at the young miss, and she was even afraid that she had said something wrong. In her past life, she hid in a mansion and received no education, and ironically, she was able to read normally after Glyne imprisoned her. She learned the ancient language quite quickly, because it was enough to know a few rules for easy translation. When the Duke learned that the girl had learned the ancient language, he shouted that she would become the most worthless empress in history, and Glyne often ridiculed her for studying. Theon asked who taught the lady the ancient language. Believe me, at such a young age she definitely could not learn it herself. The young lady was silent and did not know what to answer, and what answer would be wise in this case. But now she was more worried about the scar she saw on the butler's neck, and she was still worried. The young miss understood that she needed to answer Theon because he continued to stare at her. Under such surveillance, she still did not want to answer any questions, and she only remained silent in fear. Harper tried to find the right words so as not to reveal the whole truth about herself. So she simply replied that she was, in fact, the Duke's daughter, and stated that the butler should have nothing to do with it. Theon clearly didn't expect the young lady to respond so rudely, and his eyes widened even more in surprise. The butler was accustomed to being self-confident, and he behaved so even with the Duchess, and the young lady now wondered if she had gone too far. Theon replied that there was some truth to it, and Harper realized that she needed to leave before the situation became even stranger. After reading the first pages of the magic book, it seemed to her that there was some mistake in the book. This book was not about her situation at all. The girl did not even have the precious dragon eye nor magic, so she felt that this book was absolutely useless for her, and she needed to find something more worthwhile. She turned to Uncle Theon to finally help her find the map she needed. The young lady said that she would like to see a map of the Empire because she had never seen one in her life. Finally, the heroine got her hands on the very book she needed all this time. Harper held in her hands the very map of the Empire that could change her future. With this book, she was sure that her escape from home would no longer be a dream, and she immediately decided to read it carefully. As soon as the young lady opened the first page, more questions than answers appeared in her head. At that very moment, a magical ball, pulsating with blue light, burst forth from the depths of the opened volume. It hovered in the air like a living creature, enveloping the room in a soft, unearthly glow. The girl turned to the butler for help, and it didn't look like a map of the Empire at all. Theon asked the young lady a strange question, whether she by any chance knew how to read Akase's projection. The butler explained that due to the natural flow of mana on the continent, space is bent or distorted, causing two distant regions to connect. But if you use the Akase's method, you can determine the connection points of magical energy in advance. Theon reached out his hand carefully and touched the surface of the sphere, and at that moment a wave of images and sounds pierced his consciousness. The ball slowly rotated, emitting energy that made your skin crawl, and it was truly a brilliant invention. The map reflected the movement of magic, and it was impressive, but Harper was outraged. What good was it if you couldn't read it? She asked Theon to teach her how to read the magical method, but the butler only admitted that he had no intention of learning it. Probably the butler was just going to take revenge for that incident, which is why he didn't want to tell anything. He admitted that the training would probably take more than a month, but her sister would soon return, and then it would be difficult to even walk freely around the mansion. Theon was sure that in any case the lady would never have a situation where she would need such complex knowledge. And he even joked that it would be better to read fairy tales like other girls, rather than get involved in such serious things. At this moment, the butler began to cough very loudly, and the young lady became worried again. The young man doubled over from a violent cough, but continued to insist that everything was fine. Harper noticed that the cough seemed to be much worse than before, and she had no idea what to do. As soon as she thought about this, she immediately remembered the butler's words when he asked her not to worry about anything. His face remained pale and drawn. Harper didn't believe a single word he said. She knew he was hiding something. She always saw Theon as more than just a servant, but rather a close friend and mentor, and felt that she had to do something to help him. But she understood perfectly well that she shouldn't interfere just like that. But now she firmly decided to help this man. Perhaps soon everything would be back to normal, and Harper was sure she could definitely handle it. She saw the strange mark on her neck again, and this time she realized she was definitely not mistaken. She remembered the mark very well and decided to ask the butler directly about what had happened, because such marks on the body could not have appeared just like that. Harper asked if he had ever poisoned himself with the yellow-green grass, since she knew the reasons for this cough very well. Because of its ugly appearance, this herb is known as the devil's herb. When poisoned, spots appear on the body and a strong cough begins. Exactly the same marks appeared on the butler's neck, and the young man was very surprised, thank goodness, how Harper managed to find out about this. The little girl tried to figure out what to say about this, but she couldn't tell the truth that she learned about everything from her past life. In fact, she was also once poisoned by a yellow-green herb, which caused her to develop exactly the same symptoms. Fortunately, there was a servant from another country next to her at the time who knew the treatment method very well. She quickly found a remedy that helped Harper, and after taking the medication, she quickly recovered. But Theon still didn't seem to know how to cure it, although in the Empire they consider the yellow-green grass an evil thing and reject it in every possible way. Harper admitted that she read about it in books, and they say that poisoning with this herb is also painful. She was determined to help the butler, as his symptoms would only get worse with each passing day. And if things continue like this, Theon could soon suffer greatly from a painful cough. Her large blue eyes, usually full of mischief and curiosity, now expressed genuine concern. But that didn't matter now, and Harper said, as many say, that yellow-green grass poisoning is incurable. In fact, she knew the truth very well, and told the butler that it was not so, and that a cure existed. Theon visited all the doctors in the capital, who unanimously declared that the poisoning was incurable, but in another region this herb is used as food. The yellow-green plant growing in another state has exactly the same one, and it is identical to the one growing in the Empire. But basically the inhabitants ate the leaves or stems of the plant according to the culture of the Empire, and the people of another state also ate the tubers. The butler listened carefully to her words and realized that there really was truth in them and that Harper was not talking nonsense. Harper meant that the roots of this plant neutralize that very poison. Harper tried to convey the information as clearly as possible so that Theon would understand the danger. Fortunately, it seems the young man understood everything right away because he himself read in a book that Karne is the homeland of yellow-green grass. Theon knew that if he asked Harper how she knew how to neutralize the poison, she would definitely not answer him. The young lady had just helped the butler cope with his illness, and she really hoped that he would not leave it like that. Suddenly, he picked up a book and made an appointment 2 days later at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and suggested that they meet for a lesson on interpreting diagrams. This meant that the butler agreed to teach Harper and warned that if she was late, she would be punished with a lot of homework. It was all too unexpected, and the young lady realized she was on the right track. And most of all, she was glad that Theon agreed to teach her the complex interpretation of magical diagrams. It was at this moment that the heroes seemed to become a little closer to each other, and for the first time, the young miss saw a sweet smile on the face of the cold-blooded Theon. 2 days later, the girl began an important training, and at the first lesson, he asked the little girl to concentrate and look carefully at the magic ball. He asked what would be the fastest route to get from Vaenen to the state of Ruthenia. Studying the magic map, Harper answered that she needed to mount a horse and ride to the lands of Lycan, as well as find a portal in the southern forest. Theon decided to give the girl a little hint. The conditions were simple, Harper had a very urgent matter, and we were talking about 1,000 gold coins. In this case, the lady suggested not to go through the forest, but simply jump from the waterfall, and through the portal at the waterfall you can immediately get to the Rutan beach. With 1,000 gold coins at stake, Harper was confident that breaking just one leg would be nothing. This was the correct answer, and the lady did well in reading the magic card, and the butler decided to end the lesson for today. Harper smiled, because he initially said that it would take a whole month to learn, but it took her only a little time to understand everything. The butler probably just wanted to scare her so that she would take the task more seriously. In Theon's transparent mug, she saw those same yellow-green leaves of grass that she had spoken of earlier. The butler felt much better, and as Harper had warned, he drank the root, and after that the cough really stopped. The baby was incredibly happy that she was able to help Theon, and he listened to her. All this time, the heroine carelessly called the butler uncle, but now he decided to clarify why. Theon did not consider himself an uncle at all, and he was practically the same age as the heroine's sister. At that moment, Harper wondered how old the butler really was, and to her he always seemed like an adult. Harper even wondered if he really wanted her to call him Big Brother, but the young man asked her not to say such terrible things. His brother was half his lady's age, and Theon simply asked to be called by his first name, since that was how a lady was supposed to address her servants. The baby sincerely pronounced his name and immediately agreed to the new pleasant conditions. This morning, the heroine was fast asleep in her bed until she felt someone touching her shoulder and asking her to wake up. Harper was wrapped in a blanket, and she had been listening to lectures for a whole week and was very tired, but Jenna asked if the lady had forgotten what day it was. Today was indeed a special day, and it was about Mrs. Callista, the young heroine's sister. And it was not without reason that Jenna tried to wake her up as early as possible so that the girl would have time to prepare for the important event. After all, today her older sister named Callista is finally returning home to the mansion. Jenna advised the lady to greet her sister modestly, not to stand out and not to open her mouth. Her face was not supposed to smile, and the maid tried to tell the girl how to do it correctly. But for some reason, Harper opened her eyes incredibly wide, and Jenna asked the lady to make her eyes relaxed and her face softer. She kept her hair simple so Harper wouldn't be noticed, but her nervousness made the little girl's facial muscles seem to freeze like stone. Today, Harper was so disguised that she could even be mistaken for a servant, and finally the preparations were finished. Jenna warned them to hide in the farthest corner possible and asked Harper to go downstairs and get ready for the meeting. The young lady felt very uncomfortable, and she walked slowly towards the living room. She felt that there was definitely unrest in the palace this morning, and all the servants had been bustling about since early morning. The more animatedly the maid carried out her work, the more the little girl's anxiety grew. But today she couldn't stand out. She had to blend in and remain invisible. The maids bustled about, the knights tried to line up properly, and fresh flowers were prepared for the sisters' arrival. As Jaina said, the young lady was about to hide somewhere far away, but suddenly she felt someone push her in the back. Behind her stood a young knight, who turned to the girl with a rude question. Was everyone really getting ready? Was she going to idle away her time? The little girl did not expect that someone would speak so brazenly, and turning around, she saw the young gentleman. It was a knight named Louis who always tried to bully the young lady, and this time he stabbed her in the back with a wooden sword. Louis chuckled and said that the girl's clothes were so drab that he even thought she was a maid. Louis Evans, a student of the 3rd Night Company, Clarice's nephew, who always bothered and frightened the young lady. Louis laughed and continued to tease the girl with the sword, but the heroine was no longer the same frightened little girl, and now she saw that Louis was a real fool. She couldn't believe that she was being humiliated by such a child, and Louis continued to tease her, brazenly poking her with a wooden sword. Previously, the young lady would have tolerated all his bullying, but now she was not going to tolerate such humiliation. Harper was outraged. Louis uses a wooden sword outside of training, and most likely the captain of the order does not know about it at all. Louis said menacingly that if the girl reported everything to the captain, he would definitely not leave her alone. But Harper replied that she would remind the boy of everything he had done to her up until now. Her sister would be coming soon, and a knight's apprentice certainly had no right to behave like that. Until then, the young lady had always remained silent, and Louis continued to mock her, but now this girl turned out to be very brave. He couldn't help but push the young lady. Harper expressed her opinion, but the knight didn't expect the girl to answer him. Since everything happened on the stairs, Harper lost her footing and Louis went flying with her. The maids were already ready to meet the mistress. They lined up in a row and hung their heads low. But the living room was in chaos, as the young lady had just had a loud argument with Knight Louis. As they fell, Harper suddenly felt a strange tension and heard that everything around her became too quiet. And the deathly silence could mean only one thing: her sister had entered the estate building and seen everything with her own eyes. Harper's heart was pounding like crazy when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Callista, she was approaching. Her name was whispered with trepidation in the corridors of the castle, and the servants tried to avoid meeting her piercing gaze. The door swung open and Callista walked into the room. Tall, stately, with a shock of blonde hair, she looked like a real warrior. Harper felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what was coming: punishment, a reprimand, or something much worse. Her stormy, sky-colored eyes scanned the room, searching for someone, finally landing on Harper, who had just fallen down the stairs and was sitting in front of her. The maids bowed politely when they saw their mistress, and it seemed that at that moment no one was even breathing in the living room. Harper was shaking with fear. Memories of death were stirring her consciousness, but the young lady tried with all her might to calm down. First, she should have greeted him according to etiquette, but at that moment, Louis brazenly pushed the girl forward. He grabbed her hand and shouted at her to get out of the way immediately, as he needed to greet his mistress. Louis pushed the young lady aside and declared that she was blocking his way and should not get under his feet. The girl sat on the floor, and the knight turned to the lady, apologizing for the proper gesture to such a noble man. Harper looked at Louis's behavior and didn't understand when he had become so impudent and what he was even talking about. Now he was trying to present the situation as if the little girl herself was to blame for everything. Lady Callista was a warlike lady with a cold face and long silver hair, and now she was extremely outraged by the behavior of Knight Louis. She said what had happened to the Lupern house during this time, and how she could have been greeted in such a way. She turned to Knight Sawyer and asked if it was really so difficult to teach an apprentice the simple manners of a knight. The knight commander admitted that it was entirely his fault, and he was ready for any punishment, because his student was now behaving too insolently. Seeing the commander, the young lady realized that it was this man who had once saved her life. She had asked Klein in the past to release the commander, and heard that he had taken him prisoner, admitting that he was her benefactor. When Harper was little, Sawyer saved her many times, even against his sister's orders. She remembered him very well from his past life, and really wanted no one to harm him now. When she was married to Duke Glain, as soon as the young man took the knight prisoner, he was going to kill him. Now, Harper looked at the living Commander Sawyer and was glad that she was able to see him at least in this guise. Callista's cold gaze was chilling. There was no warmth or sympathy in it, only an icy detachment that could freeze the very soul. There was a power in that gaze that transcended physical might, a power born of will, steel, and ruthlessness. Callista asked to be given a wooden sword, and asked Louis if he was so impudent he was probably confident in his skills. Swinging her sword, the lady offered to fight in battle, and if Louis won, she promised to forgive him for everything that happened today, and not even punish him. Louis knew perfectly well that the lady would not repeat herself twice, and now she challenged him to a duel. Perhaps this could be a great chance for Louis to show himself, and the sword in the girl's fragile hands seemed less scary to him. Louis was sure that the knight was probably just giving in to her because she was a lady, and now she supposedly thought she was a jack of all trades. Those present watched with bated breath as what was happening, and everyone knew perfectly well that Clarice was an excellent swordmaster. Louis, confident in himself, was going to crush the lady like a bug, considering her simply an arrogant and impudent woman. The worst thing happened the next second, and Louis swung his sword even before the start. Her cold gaze was her weapon, her protection, her curse. It gave her power over those around her. She was ready to teach Louis a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life, and let the entire palace witness his fall. But there was no confidence in Louis's behavior, only his self-confident pride. Callista swung her sword, wooden but whistling through the air with threatening speed in front of Louis's face, and at that moment he finally realized who this lady was. Not just a haughty aristocrat in heels accustomed to luxury, but a warrior, a real one, seasoned, deadly. The lady saw foolish pride in the knight, and he did not even understand who he was going to fight against. In every movement she made, one could feel the strength honed by years of hard training and the grace of a predator ready to pounce. The wooden sword in her hands was not a toy, but an extension of her will, the embodiment of her strength. He, a self-confident knight who considered her only a weak woman, suddenly realized the full depth of his mistake. He underestimated her. The knight immediately fell to the floor from the strong blow, and the Duchess rushed to his aid. Clarissa was outraged that her sister could do such a thing, because this boy was just a young, stupid teenager. Callista said that someone who wielded a sword so stupidly could not remain in the knightly corps. She asked Sawyer to take full responsibility and leave with the child, and no one understood what was happening, because the commander of the knights had served the Duke faithfully all his life. And would the commander really leave the mansion right now? No one could believe that he would leave so easily right now. Harper couldn't help herself and stood in front of her sister and admitted that it was all her fault. The little girl trembled all over, looking into her sister's cold eyes, because right now she took all the blame on herself. Harper admitted that she was the one who spoke to Louis and allegedly stopped him, saying that she was very sorry and that she shouldn't fire the commander. Callista frowned, her gaze falling like an icy wind on her younger sister. Little Harper stepped forward, blocking her sister's path, and a shadow of doubt crossed Callista's face. Her small figure seemed tiny next to Callista, who towered over her, but there was a fire of determination in her eyes that eclipsed any fear. The sister said in a cold voice, "Does the young lady still believe that it is possible to avoid the name Lupern?" Callista's words were like icy needles piercing her heart, and Harper felt her courage melt away like snow. But despite the trembling in her hands and the tears welling up in her eyes, Harper did not back down. She knew that Sawyer had always treated her with kindness and care. Suddenly, Callista asked Sawyer to take the child away, and justice without mercy would be absolute cruelty on her part. Callista warned that if something like this happened even once, the Knight Commander would never leave here unharmed. The lady had pardoned Sawyer, and Harper was sure her sister should do what was right. The sister went to her room. The little girl couldn't even believe that she would really leave just like that. Victory was on her side, but the young lady's body was still shaking so violently that she could barely contain it. Due to the strong excitement and worries, Harper managed to notice that everything in her eyes began to blur and darken. The little girl felt her head spinning and she was ready to collapse on the floor from exhaustion. That's exactly what happened the next second, and in front of all the maids, the young lady simply fell down, closing her eyes. After this incident, Callista tried to understand whether it was okay to leave the Knight Louis as he was now. She saw his impudent behavior and disrespectful attitude very well, and the knight could not behave like that. In her office stood a personal knight named Aramis, and he asked about the boy whose arm the lady had broken when they fought. The Duchess tried to protect Louis. They say he is her nephew, but the Callisto considered this woman and others on the council to be people who only grow weeds. Callista knew that if they left her alone, she might harbor a grudge, and it would be better to deal with it as soon as possible. Aramis believed that if this woman had raised her nephew properly, the boy would not have been hit for greeting. But Callista didn't do it because of the greeting. She didn't like his attitude. He was like a dog that bites the one who feeds it. Aramis tried to understand why all this happened, and he decided that perhaps the young lady was to blame for everything. He even asked if it all happened because of Lady Harper, but at that moment Theon appeared on the threshold of the office. Aramis was indignant, not expecting to see the butler during an important conversation, but the lady herself called him to meet her. Aramis had warned the butler to knock when he entered, and there was tension between the young men. Theon deliberately adjusted his glasses with his middle finger, saying that the lady had ordered him to simply enter, and, unlike the knight, he had an excellent memory. They continued their squabble, not even paying attention to the lady, and Theon mockingly asked Aramis to prepare tea for the conversation. He actually asked the knight to make tea, but he suggested sending a maid, citing ignorance. Callista thought his answer was too stupid and asked him to pour water into the cup and just add tea leaves. Callista said that if he couldn't handle this task, he would bring cold water, and she would order him to simply pour the tea on himself. She called the butler for a reason, and said that important information had just arrived and she had heard something strange. For example, Theon became Harper's mentor in magical training, which she knew absolutely nothing about. There were very strange rumors going around the palace, and the lady became aware of them as soon as she arrived. The butler was a little scared because he didn't even ask the lady for permission, but instead of punishing her, she asked what level Harper had. It had only been one lesson, and he couldn't yet tell exactly what skills the young lady possessed. A few years ago, he taught mathematics at the academy, and Callista said that the butler clearly meant something to the child's education if he was willing to disobey her orders, even for that. Callista wanted to know if this meant that the baby did have ducal blood in it after all. Theon said that the young lady was not at such a level that the mistress would be concerned. The butler knew that he could expect serious punishment, and he sat silently opposite the lady and waited to see what would happen next. But the lady did not ask any questions and told the butler that he could go, saying something important at the end. She reported the offer to side with her, which was still valid, and asked Theon to respond when he made his decision. Taking a deep breath, the young man left the office, fully aware of his responsibility. Callista had repeatedly offered to take Theon's side, and all this time the butler had been slow to respond. The young man had his own vision on this matter, and an offer from such a person was also important to him. In fact, he wasn't going to tell anyone about the person he really wanted to be with. Little Harper heard a voice in her bedroom, and again she thought the maid was trying to wake her up. Rubbing her eyes, the young lady was indignant, because she was still at the age when she needed a sound sleep. But instead of Jenna, she saw a completely different girl standing right next to her bed and asking if the young lady was awake. When the little girl opened her eyes and realized that it was not her maid in front of her, she screamed in surprise. She immediately recognized the red-haired, pleasant girl whom she clearly remembered from her past. It was Lady Vtori. The little girl cried out her name, but probably didn't even expect that she remembered her. Her sweet smile lit up the whole room, and Vtori was very honored that the little lady remembered her name. Harper didn't even notice how she said the name, and of course she remembered this girl perfectly well. Vtori Miller and Aramis Miller, and if anyone didn't know them, they were definitely not from a ducal family. Vtori was a medical genius, and Aramis was a fencing genius. It was these two heroes who were the sword and shield of Mistress Callista Lupern, but Harper was surprised why it was she who appeared in her room. Vtori admitted that it was not at all that the girl had developed an illness, but that her body was simply weakened, and she asked to eat and sleep more, promising to look after her health. Harper had not expected such an important person in the palace to come and take care of her health and nutrition when she had previously been eating stale bread. Vtori warned that if the girl felt unwell, she could call her at any time. Harper was still confused, and no one had paid attention to her condition before. The little girl didn't understand what was going on at all. She met Louis at the welcoming ceremony, and then everything seemed to change dramatically. The butler came right after her, having heard that Harper was not feeling well, but asked her not to stick to the bed and to stick to her daily routine. As soon as he asked the girl to go to bed at 10 in the evening and get up at 7 in the morning, she screamed that she couldn't stand such a schedule. The little girl threw off the blanket, but suddenly saw cute pink socks with strawberries on her feet. Theon warned her that these socks would keep the girl's feet warm and showed her many more colorful socks that the young lady was required to wear. The butler learned of the state of health from Lady Vtori, and she warned that the young lady needed to stay warm at all times in order to grow up healthy. Theon started to say something about great deeds and deeds, but Harper had no idea what he meant. It turned out that it was Theon who called Vtori because she was more competent than any healer living in the estate. Harper didn't even know that he knew Vtori, and she turned out to be his good colleague. But he absolutely hated her brother, and their communication was never friendly. The little girl understood that Theon was not on very good terms with Aramis, but he considered Vtori to be very mature and intelligent. He spoke well of this girl, considering her a person who would definitely become the royal family's physician. There was no reason why she couldn't achieve it, and Harper knew that everyone thought so, but she knew the terrible future. And one fine day, the lady, who had always been cheerful and healthy, committed suicide. Vittori's death was an incident that occurred during a council of elders and Callista, who controlled the position of the head of a small family. The chairman of the council of elders spent a lot of time trying to control the girl in order to cut off the Miller family. But his ambitious plan, in which the Millers were just puppets, was interrupted when she killed herself for Callista. But the lady learned of this fact too late. In one fell swoop, Callista dealt with all her opponents. I don't even know what was said behind her back. Come to think of it, she had been trying to kill her sister ever since, as if she was the one who was ready to eliminate everyone in her path. Harper wondered if Vtori had lived. She might have been able to stop the Callista's atrocities. Perhaps she would even buy time while Harper was about to escape, and realizing all this, the little girl asked Theon how many grass roots he had left. She unexpectedly asked to lend her exactly 3 roots, and to do it as soon as possible. Theon was even ready to give the girl all his supplies, and at that moment, she realized that he really was the best. The young lady promised that she would definitely go to the academy tomorrow, and the butler promised to prepare everything. She realized that she could save Lady Vtori, and she decided that she absolutely had to do it in this life so that in the future they could help each other. The next day, Theon brought the roots that the lady had requested and also wrote down their medicinal properties. The young gentleman had something else in his hands, and he turned to little Harper with concern. Since it was cold outside, he suggested wearing a cute pink hat with ears, and the girl was incredibly happy with such a gift. Theon turned out to be a very caring person who was concerned about her health. The little heroine went to the academy and didn't even imagine that she would find herself in a huge room with a bunch of doors. If Harper had known about this in advance, she would have asked the maid or Theon to go with her. She looked carefully at each door and looked for the medical research laboratory. One door caught her attention and was clearly different from the rest. The lady tried to guess, but understood that she could simply apologize and say that she got confused. so Harper opened the door without thinking and quietly apologized, asking if there was anyone in the office. It was a huge office with a lot of books, and Harper noticed that there was not a single speck of dust in it. She walked further into the office. Her attention was drawn to an unusual book standing on the shelf, but suddenly she heard a cold voice behind her, asking if the lady really had the nerve to come in here without permission. Turning around, Harper was horrified to see her sister and Aramis, who had seen her enter the office. Not understanding how her sister had appeared there at that very moment, the little girl looked at her with frightened big eyes. Aramis said that no one was allowed to enter the teacher's office without permission, and he even thought that it was a murderer. The people chuckled, saying that the night still had a long way to go, and just because this girl was young didn't mean she wasn't a killer. Just now, without realizing it, the little girl seemed to have stuck her head into the mouth of a tiger, and that tiger was her sister. Harper had some grass leaves in her hands, and Callista asked if this girl couldn't commit murder by poisoning someone with unknown roots. Harper held the green leaves in front of her, saying it was just a gift she was going to give to Vtori. Aramis stated that in that case the girl went through the wrong door, and in order to kill Vtori, she needs to go to the second floor. Callista suggested that she first think about interacting with her future personal doctor, deciding that the girl was holding poisonous grass in her hands. She didn't believe her words and asked again if the young lady was really confidently stating that the grass in her hands was poisonous. Approaching the girl, she extended her hand to touch the leaves of the grass, and probably Callista decided to check. She opened the baby's mouth and said that her sister could prove on her own that this herb really wasn't poisonous. Harper knew her sister wanted her to eat the leaves, and she was holding her too tightly, and she couldn't even move. Callista's grip was so tight that Harper couldn't even speak, standing with her mouth open. The sister stated very curiously, last time Harper was locked in her room with icy cheeks, but now she feels different. Callista continued to pinch her sister's cheek as if she found something strange about it. Touching the other cheek, the sister was surprised because the young lady's cheeks were incredibly soft. She kept deliberately feeling her cheeks while Harper stood motionless, having eaten all the grass. This was probably a new method of torture for Callista. She asked the girl not to move while she continued to pull her cheeks. Suddenly, the sister realized, now that she looked into Harper's eyes, she realized they were very similar to her grandfather's eyes. He had light blue eyes just like hers, and unlike her father, he was a holy man. The girl held the remaining leaves of grass tightly in her hands and did not understand what her sister was doing to her. At that moment, she was about to be rescued, and Vtori appeared in the office, asking what Lady Callista was doing with the little girl. Finally, the sister stopped groping Harper's pikes, which had already turned red from her hands. Aramis stated that he was interrogating the young assassin, who said that Vtori was her target. Vtori stated that in that case the baby should have been sent to the second floor and not tormented her beautiful cheeks because her laboratory is not here. Harper loudly stated that she did not try to kill Vtori. She brought the medicinal herb, and Theon also asked to pass on a note. Looking at the green leaves, Vtori couldn't believe that it was because of this plant that Theon's cough stopped. Callista learned that the butler had recovered, and Dr. Rubens relayed the information yesterday. Vtori looked at the young lady and asked if she really brought this healing plant especially for her. The little girl smiled and confessed that she really liked Lady Vtori and her caring attitude. Hearing the pleasant words, the girl went crazy with happiness, and her eyes became like huge hearts. Vtori invited Lady Harper to go with her, promising to treat her to some very tasty cookies as a reward for the gift. The little girl knew very well that Vtori was a very kind girl, and a very pleasant relationship developed between them. And Callista couldn't believe that there was such a warm relationship between her sister and Vtori. The sound of broken dishes could be heard in the Duchess's room, and the lady was unhappy that some people were completely ignoring her. Having broken an expensive porcelain mug, she continued to be angry, not paying attention to the maid, who claimed that it was very dangerous. At her words, she asked the maid to shut her mouth and could not allow some servant to tell her what to do. The Duchess was beside herself with rage, and she hated little Harper with all her soul, calling her a miserable creature who pretended to be nice. It was Harper's fault that Leroy was kicked out, and now Louis was the knight, and the Duchess was screaming that she would never forgive this vile girl. She tore off the tablecloth and broke all the dishes. At that moment, a young man appeared in her room, who noticed that the Duchess was full of energy today. That man was the vice chairman of the Council of Elders, a venerable gentleman named Osen. As soon as he appeared in the room, the Duchess asked the maid Celia to leave immediately. Osen knew what had happened and tried to calm the Duchess down, but the situation was too dire. The Duchess was beside herself with anger, because Osen knew what Callista had done to her nephew. Callista even said that she would exclude her from the family, but the lady assured that Chef Leroy had been helping her with resources all this time. Osen noted, the chairman said, he will quickly convey the decision to His Highness. In that case, the Duchess asked to convey to the chairman that they needed to proceed with the plan they had discussed earlier. The man immediately understood what was being discussed, and this plan had been in the works for a long time. He assured her that even more time was needed to carry out this plan, but now Osen only irritated the Duchess with these words. All this time, the Duchess had not been sitting idle. Osen could not believe that she had really begun to act, and the lady was waiting for the day when the Miller family would be completely in her hands. Vtori and the young lady went to the blooming garden to talk and drink tea with delicious cookies. The lady thoughtfully asked the maid to pour the baby some delicious tea, which had recently been brought from another country. Harper looked into the mug and realized that she had never seen tea like this before, and it was definitely special. Usually the girl drank juice instead of tea, but she couldn't help but try this aromatic drink. There were also shortbread cookies with chocolate chips on the table, and Vtori thoughtfully presented them to the little girl. Taking a bite, Harper realized that the sweet cookies were definitely much better than regular tea. Vtori was very happy, and her sister also really liked these cookies. Harper was surprised that her sister also loved sweets, and before she simply hated neither cakes nor pastries. Vtori smiled and admitted that Callista also liked sweet food, even though she didn't eat it that often. The lady thought about it and told the girl that it seemed to her that the mistress did not want to pay attention to such trifles. There were still people on the Council of Elders who did not recognize Callista as a worthy warrior and ruler. That is why the girl was often subjected to rumors and contemptuous glances from the elders, who constantly whispered behind her back. There is a story about how the Council of Elders and Callista's mother were real enemies, which is why she has not yet received an official title. And her father, instead of helping, was now traveling with new lovers, and Harper really didn't want to return to this story. What was much more important to her now was how other people treated Lady Vtori. The little girl wondered if the advisors didn't like her either, and she couldn't understand how this sweet girl could not be respected and loved. The young lady admitted that she would be sad if some people treated Vtori badly, because she was a wonderful person. Vtori asked the little girl not to worry. She had no opportunity to see people from the council, so no one knew anything about her. Harper had specifically decided to find out the information, and she was glad the Council of Elders had not yet reached Vtori, and she would have to gradually follow this. While they were chatting pleasantly, the young lady told Vtori about a small request that she would like to make. Now was the time to learn about the research into the effects of that medicinal herb, and Harper said she wanted Vtori to do it. The girl was very surprised and asked if she really had to do this herself. Little Harper approached Vtori and confessed that she wished the lady would actually do it herself, and that this was her special gift. Vtori hugged Harper and happily admitted that she would, of course, completely independently study the gift and fulfill the young lady's request. In reality, Harper did it because she was afraid someone else might steal the results, and at times like that, you have to pretend it's not just childish whining. After that, time flew by quickly. Callista's graduation banquet was to take place very soon. Jenna had the important task of preparing the young lady for the event, and she was frantically trying to make a choice. By mistake, she took 2 left shoes, and Harper asked if she couldn't choose something else, since this was not her first banquet. Jenna had 3 dresses in front of her eyes, and she couldn't figure out which one to wear. Jenna's head was simply bursting, because Sir gave her much more pocket money than usual. She looked at the dress and tried to figure out which one would be best suited for the special occasion. Jenna suggested that Harper wear a yellow dress, but it looked the worst of all for summer. They say the banquet will be decorated with gold, and the maid wanted to correct the mistake of the last time so that Harper would not stand out. For the girl, it was all tiring, and she wanted to just forget about all the outfits. But at the party, she had to show her face. Today, guests were supposed to arrive from abroad, and Harper wondered if her father's guests would come too, even if he wasn't there. Jenna overheard that the chairman of the Council of Elders had invited a famous family of knights. As soon as the little girl heard about this, she immediately understood which specific family of knights was being talked about. It was the Igarda family that did all sorts of illegal things, and Harper already knew them from her past life. In her past life, the Knight family only came once, and that was only when they lured Lady Vtori into a trap. The young lady understood that all this could turn into a terrible tragedy, and Vtori needed to be saved somehow. Only now did Harper realize that everything would happen at the event, and now more than ever she needed the help of a maid. So Harper said with a serious face that she needed to talk to the butler as soon as possible. She was keen to speak with Theon before the banquet began to avoid a dire situation. As expected from a duke's ball, the event was to be held on a completely different level. The ball had an air of grandeur and exquisite live music. And of course, no luxurious ball can do without handsome gentlemen who make many ladies crazy. Courageous knights were invited to the ball and every lady squealed at their presence. But some of them preferred more intelligent men and looked at the butler Theon. His blue tailcoat perfectly emphasized his refined appearance, and as the best graduate of the Imperial Academy, he was impeccable in mind and manners. The ladies were divided into two camps, with others believing that a real man should be able to control his body, like Sir Aramis with his fiery red hair. The girls argued among themselves, choosing the most worthy young man, and many dreamed that Aramis would fight for them, considering this a great happiness. Two ladies were arguing right at the ball about the charm of a man in his beauty, and they attracted Aramis's attention with their loud arguments. The knight and his butler stood and watched what happened, listening to the ladies talk about real men. Aramis noted that 4 ladies had said they liked him, but only 3 had chosen a butler so far. Theon replied that it would be nice if the young man would just keep quiet, but he had already started to talk too much. The maid approached the butler and reported an urgent and important message from Lady Harper. She warned the young lady asks to look after Lady Vtori throughout the entire gala event. The butler listened carefully to the maid and realized that Harper would not ask to do this without a good reason. Jenna carefully got the young miss ready for the ball, and as soon as Harper showed up at the party, she realized that everything was exactly as the maid had said. Ladies in luxurious dresses danced around with elegant gentlemen, and no one cared about the young lady. Servants in tailcoats carried sweets, and no one even offered Harper a piece of the delicious cake. Harper realized that this definitely wouldn't work, and decided to sneak into the kitchen to grab a sweet snack. She was sure that there definitely shouldn't be anyone in the kitchen, since all the guests were at the event. But as soon as she opened the kitchen door, she suddenly saw her sister sitting with a plate. It was Callista, and the little girl didn't understand why the biggest star was all alone in the kitchen. The little girl was even scared, wondering if she had entered the wrong door again, although she knew for sure that she had entered the kitchen. The sister asked if the young girl had also come for the cake, and then everything was in order. Callista immediately noticed that her sister's outfit was rather unusual, and she had never seen such a color before. The lady called the dress ugly and asked her never to wear it again, but Harper wore it specifically because of her. She held out a plate with a slice of chocolate cake with strawberries and offered Harper a taste. Trembling all over and looking at her sister, the little girl took the plate with the cake with trembling hands. She took a bite and realized what true bliss it was, because the cake was incredibly delicious. The cake was too sweet for Callista, so it was not served at the ball, and they say the confectioners overdid it with sugar. But for Harper, the treat was just right, and besides, the cake definitely had to be sweet. Suddenly, the sisters realized that they had just said this phrase in unison, word for word. Harper continued to chew on the delicious piece of cake, trying to understand what she had just said in front of her sister. Callista looked at the young lady and tried to figure out how to communicate with her, because their relationship had always been cold. She took the plate from the girl and asked her to eat more slowly, and the little girl was afraid that now her sister would take her cakes and never give them back again. But instead she broke off a piece and asked her sister to open her mouth, wanting to put the sweet treat in her mouth. Callista never acted like this, so Harper didn't understand and was afraid that her sister was clearly up to something. Something strange was happening now, and the little girl even wondered if this was her last meal. Callista said that the cake could be eaten completely, and suddenly she asked her sister not to wander around anywhere. With her mouth full, Harper looked at her sister with surprised eyes and asked why she shouldn't do that. Callista confessed to the girl that she was one of those children who was quite easy to manipulate, and bad people could take advantage of that. Life under the control of the old people was, in Callista's opinion, very unhappy, and in this estate it was unlikely that anyone would be able to help the little girl. Harper realized that her sister did not wish her any harm, and was simply trying to protect her from bad people and warn her. At that moment, the young lady realized that she had never looked into Callista's eyes like that before, and that was the only time she had done so before her sister killed her. The one time she finally looked into her sister's cold eyes was her last. It happened right before her death, when in her past life Callista came to kill Harper, mercilessly. But only the young heroine knew about the future, and now her own sister was sitting in front of her, who was simply trying to protect her. Harper tried to understand what was causing this behavior, and until this moment she thought Callista hated her. The butler Theon entered the kitchen, probably following the girl, wanting to talk to her. Neither Callista nor the young lady herself expected to see the young man who had suddenly burst in here. Theon asked for forgiveness from my lady, and in a trembling voice said that Lady Vtori had disappeared from the ceremonial event. Harper couldn't believe it actually happened so quickly, because the party had just begun. Callista asked how this could have happened, and perhaps the girl simply went to the academy. But Theon told me that the Vtori suddenly disappeared right in the middle of the dance, and her last partner was the second son of the Nitra family. The little girl did not understand what had happened, because according to her calculations, the girl should have disappeared only after 2 years. Theon turned to the little girl, knowing full well that Vtori was about to suddenly disappear. Theon asked excitedly if the young lady didn't know where she was right now. Harper tried not to be afraid and to pull herself together, because this was not the first time this had happened. The butler was very frightened and asked Harper to tell him to send knights there immediately. But Harper understood that there was absolutely no time for this, and asked the butler not to ask questions from now on and to do as she said. At the same time, the sweet and innocent Lady Vtori was lying unconscious on the cold floor in a completely unknown place. She finally woke up from a severe headache, realizing that something terrible had really happened to her. After all, just a few minutes ago she was dancing at a ball with a noble gentleman, but suddenly she heard a voice that asked if the girl had finally woken up. In front of her stood Ivan Nitra, a young man with a cheeky grin, who declared that from now on the girl had a new master. Next to him stood some unknown man in a white mask. In his hands was a handkerchief, probably soaked in some liquid from which the lady fell asleep. Vtori was very scared, and not understanding what was happening, she asked what new gentleman they were talking about. The young man asked the girl, as soon as she left this room, to immediately go to the Duchess and kiss her feet. He assured her that of course he could continue his studies as before, since Lady Callista had a strange hobby of keeping the court physician under her thumb. The gentleman stated that in exactly 1 hour it would be 24 hours since she had last eaten Kori fruit. It was about a devil fruit that caused madness. The young man knew the girl was addicted, assuring that soon it would seem to her that her body was being torn apart and she would begin to suffocate. He shouted for the lady to immediately kneel down and swear allegiance to the Duchess herself. As the seconds passed, Vtori really did start to feel terrible, and Nitra's words weren't a lie. He counted to 3, and at that moment the bright image of Lady Callista flashed through the girl's mind. He continued to count, and with each second Vtori felt herself gradually starting to choke. It was all set up, and Ivan knew exactly down to the second at what time the lady would start having a fit. He stood with his subordinates in front of the girl sitting on the floor, waiting for her to finally feel ill. She suddenly said strange words that shocked the gentleman. She wanted to know why he was doing everything alone. Ivan was sure and was ready to swear that Vtori took the poison at exactly the same time, but suddenly the girl stood up and wished him luck with fixing the watch. Vtori pretended on purpose that she was suffocating, but now, as if nothing had happened, she stood alone, against all the knights. Ivan wasn't going to let this girl go that easily, even though his plan had failed miserably. He had no intention of leaving any witnesses alive, no matter his success, and that was the code of House Nathra. Right after these words, a piece of chocolate cake with strawberries flew into the head of the impudent, brave man. He didn't understand what happened, and even considered it a cursed divine message. But when he touched his head, he felt an ordinary piece of chocolate cake in his hair, and he could not believe that someone had pulled such a prank. A little girl stood in front of them, holding pieces of chocolate cake in her hands, and when Vtori saw Harper, she exclaimed in surprise, It was she who had just thrown a sweet treat right at the villain's head, screaming at him to let the girl go immediately. No one was supposed to come in here, and the boy wondered how the girl had gotten in, although Harper saw him looking at his watch and counting the seconds out loud. Ivan shouted angrily, "Then surely the young lady heard that he never leaves witnesses." Harper asked if this was part of the plan to get rid of Callista's sister, but he clearly needed a frontman for that. The little girl stated that if it disappeared, her sister would become the sole heir to the duchy. The knights began to whisper, because if they killed the little girl, it would create huge problems, and it would be difficult to deal with the consequences. Their plan was ruined by the little heroine, and Ivan knew they had no time to compare. They had to kill the girl and end it. The knights surrounded the young lady, while others approached Lady Victoria, wanting to seize them both. A spark of anger flashed in Ivan's eyes, and he swung his dagger, intending to kill Harper. But even in a good story, there was no place for a villain, and his fate was already decided. Blood splattered right in front of little Harper, who screamed, looking in fear at the scene unfolding before her. In this silence, like an ominous accompaniment, the death rattle of the Ivan was heard. The villain's assistants, seeing the death of their own master, did not understand what was going on here. It was definitely the voice of Callista, who had just seen with her own eyes what kind of intrigue was going on here. There was not only shock in Harper's eyes now, but also budding hope. Hope sparked by her sister's fighting spirit. Magic raged around Callista. A blue glow enveloped her. There was no plea in her voice, only unshakable confidence in her rightness, and she menacingly asked the scum of the Nitra to move away from the girl. Ivan fell to the floor with a crash, and the little girl looked at her warlike sister in shock. Theon kicked the door open and immediately rushed to Harper to help as quickly as possible. Seeing the butler, the little girl was incredibly happy because he had already come to save her. Since the Duke's death, this room had been sealed, and Theon realized it was a perfect place for plotting. But someone had cast magical barriers on the room, and as soon as Harper found out about it, she immediately exclaimed with joy, "This is not a problem at all." The blue glow around Callista intensified, illuminating the frightened faces of those around her, but Harper was sure that her sister would easily break this seal. Callista prepared for battle, and with one wave of her hand tried to destroy the strong, evil magic. Every member of House Nitra was trained in barriers and aura, so Ivan was confident that Callista would not last long without the ability to draw her sword. He hissed angrily. It wouldn't hurt to finish off both Lupern heirs right now, and the warlike lady asked to show what they were capable of. The young man laughed, asking if she really thought that someone would come running to save her now. After all, this was Riley's room, sealed since the time of the previous Duke, but at that moment something unexpected happened for the villain. The crack of torn masonry echoed through the halls, announcing a breach in the once impregnable wall. As if from nowhere, the knight Aramis appeared. He called him a non-entity and asked how he dared to raise his swords against the lady. While Ivan was begging for mercy, the knight had already swung his sword and delivered the fatal blow. Aramis brought his sword down on the first enemy. The movement was so fast that no one had time to blink. Only the bodies of the fallen enemies reminded of the bloody battle. Aramis stood in the middle of this chaos, his sword dripping with blood, but there was not a drop of pity in his eyes. In an instant, the villain's partners were defeated, and their lifeless bodies lay on the floor. Aramis approached his mistress. For Harper, it was all incredible, because her sister and the knight dealt with the gang of villains in just a few seconds. Aramis uttered some banal phrase, and the lady declared that a real fool would say so. Callista was outraged and told Aramis that she had asked him not to rage like that in the room, but now her entire dress was splattered with blood. But it was not her clothes that were at issue, and Lady Vtori, who was standing nearby, was literally sprinkled with a rain of blood. The girl's entire dress, face, and hands were covered in blood. Vtori stood motionless and tried not to get madly angry. Callista sighed and noted that the girl's indifference could only be envied. Callista looked at little Harper, the girl's huge, frightened eyes still reflecting the blue magical glow. Harper was standing right in front of her, and for this little girl, Callista was ready to fight until her last breath. She saw in them not only fear, but also nascent hope, a naive belief that Callista could protect her. Of the surviving villains, there was no way he was going to give up, as dark energy began to pulse around him, distorting the air and causing the ground beneath his feet to shake. The villain staggered towards the Lupern sisters, wheezing with the effort, but little Harper managed to notice. She pushed Callista away from the magic flying at her, so hard that she flew to the side, crashing her back into the rubble of the wall. With cries of caution, the girls managed to push their sister, who was the villain's target, with all their might. The magical shackles squeezed the baby's neck so tightly that she screamed in horror, but tried with all her might to help and push away the evil magic. The villain managed to take advantage of the moment, and the sisters saw the frightened eyes of the girl who was held hostage. The villain grabbed the little girl and asked why they had brought a hostage here who was completely useless. With horror, Aramis recognized the familiar voice of the man who hid his face under a white mask. It was the vice-chairman, named Osen, and he said that, as expected, Lady Callista had excellent instincts. He shouted that no one should even think of grabbing him, because if Lady Harper died here, then everyone knew perfectly well who would be the main suspect. There was almost no time left to react, and it seemed that the baby's fate was sealed. Osen warned that if the lady did not want to be found guilty, she needed to dispel her aura and step back. The villain said, then perhaps in that case he won't kill little Mrs. Lupern now. Osen stated that he was ready to throw the young lady off the northern cliff after the escape, and offered to find her afterwards, but in any case Harper did not want to die like that stupidly, and only prayed that someone would save her. Help was not long in coming, and the very next second Osen croaked in a dying voice, and a sharp blade appeared in his back. The villain managed to look back and saw a sharp blade sticking out of his back, with drops of blood slowly dripping down it. He had absolutely no idea who could have done this, but behind him stood a cute red-haired girl. She stood there in bloody clothes, smiling because it was in her hands that the murder weapon was. Osen couldn't believe that a lady who studied medicine did this, but Vtori was also from a noble family. Moreover, she knew that knight very well, hinting at Aramis from his very birth, even from his mother's womb. Vtori admitted that as a token of gratitude for such a rare experience, she coated the dagger with red butterfly venom. Therefore, the chairman must soon disappear forever and fall into eternal sleep. Osen was killed with a poisoned dagger, and an oppressive silence fell over the huge hall, broken only by muffled sobs and gnashing of teeth. Harper was surprised. She was sure that Vtori was definitely one of those girls who showed mercy. But the most important thing was that Lady Vtori was now completely fine, and none of the heroes were hurt. Suddenly, the little girl felt her head spinning, and she was ready to fall unconscious right onto the floor. But at that moment, her sister's hand grabbed her small body, and Harper, with frightened eyes, simply stumbled. At that very moment, watching from the sidelines, the Lupern sisters realized the depth of their connection. Their relationship has always been complicated, but now, in this desperate situation, they saw how much they mean to each other. They realized that their strength lay in unity, in support, in an unbreakable bond that was stronger than any magic. And for the first time in her entire present and past life, the little girl saw her sister's face so excited. Harper still fell to the floor and felt a strange sensation in her body, as if she had easily flown upward. Opening her eyes, she realized that she was still in the same room Riley had, where the insidious villains had been killed. But for some reason, she saw her body lying on the floor, and she couldn't believe that everyone had really abandoned her there. Suddenly, she heard strange sobs next to her, and right next to her stood the same young girl with blonde hair. It was that same Harper, the same one, only from a past life, and the baby was crying bitterly. Harper pinched her face to see if it was just a dream. It was strange, and she didn't feel any pain at all. She looked at herself from the past, recognizing this cute dress, and in any case, then she too was truly all equal. In her past life, she was too busy running away from Callista, and thanks to that, she found the secret entrance to Riley's room. Harper from her past life was very upset and kept crying, and the heroine realized that it was time to help her past self. It was all too unbelievable, but the little girl felt all the pain she had felt in her past life. She came up to her and asked little Harper not to cry, promising that this time everything would be different and they could change everything. As it turned out, Harper managed to travel back in time to talk to herself, making it clear that she would definitely be happy. And even despite the cold relationship with her sister, in the future she promised herself that she would definitely succeed. Several days had passed since this terrible event, and the butler came to the lady with an important message. Callista immediately asked how things were going with the vice chairman and Ivan Nitra. They were still alive, if you could call it life. The villains didn't say a word, and it looked like they had been put under a silence spell. As for the Grand Duchess, Theon was sure she could still be useful, since her personal servant knew something to blame on her. In the end, everything was done in the name of Chairman Osen, but this cunning chairman always managed to slip away. Callista understood that this incident would have to be hushed up and asked to eliminate Osen and the members of the Nitra family because it was not yet time to bear their claws. The medicinal herb that the baby gave turned out to be the reason for neutralizing the poison in Vtori's blood. Callista knew that this was the herb that Harper had given the butler for his cough, and he, too, had been surprised when the girl said that she had gotten used to its smell during her research. The sister was sure that the baby had definitely not ended up in Riley's room by chance when Vtori was held hostage. Even Callista herself had to disarm a bunch of magical seals to get there, and Aramis gave up halfway and simply broke through the wall. But Harper had been there before both of them. There was no luck in magic, and that meant the enchantment in the room resonated with her mana. If that were true, she wouldn't have been able to see Osen's invisible aura, but the little girl reacted before anyone could notice anything. Theon was worried. The lady began to guess about Harper's abilities, and he had to pay her attention, and very urgently. Callista still had no good reason, but if a fight over the inheritance broke out, there would be trouble. So the lady wondered what the girl could have felt that would make her order someone to bring her. Callista had thought about this for a long time, and it was obvious that her sister was afraid of her, but she couldn't understand why Harper thought she was willing to risk everything to save her. The lady asked many questions, not understanding why the girl was trying to protect her at that moment. But Callista now had more questions than answers, and she had come up with absolutely nothing. The heroine knew one thing for sure: her little sister knew much more than she was telling. Callista asked the butler to let her know when the baby woke up, and she decided to leave with Aramis to take care of the Nitra family. Theon was incredibly worried about the young lady. He also knew more about her than her sister. Now he just prayed that the baby would sleep a little more and just rest from what had happened. Little Harper woke up to strange sounds, and the servants were doing something incredible in her room. The maid enthusiastically played the flute. The young man asked her to wait a little, promising to prepare food for the lady. Her room was full of servants. Someone was offering a massage, someone brought a chest of drawers, and it was completely unclear what was going on here. Harper looked at Jenna, who was standing to the side, and asked her to explain what was going on. Theon said the room was full of maids because that was her sister's order. She ordered that the second princess of the House of Lupern be provided with everything she might need. Until this time, no one had paid any attention to the girl, but now she was even served a delicate cream of corn soup and the best tenderloin steak. Taking a bite, Harper even thought the food might be poisoned, but her sister certainly wouldn't be so careless. Theon asked to eat more, because after being with the baby for so long, he clearly didn't have enough strength. The butler suddenly called the lady señorita, and the little girl was surprised because the young man had never called her that before. Suddenly, the Duchess burst into the room and screamed, asking where the butler had put her maid Salia. She saw that the young lady's room was full of gifts and was outraged, not understanding what it all meant. All this time, the Duchess considered herself the rightful mistress of the house, and was angry that something was being done here without her knowledge. In the Duchess's opinion, the butler had gone completely mad. There was a clear hierarchy in the house, and he dared to give away her personal maid without even asking. Harper only now realized that one of the maids was Clarice's personal servant, and no wonder she was so good. The Duchess continued to scream throughout the room, but it was as if no one heard her, and she was furious that the servants, for some reason, no longer obeyed her. At this moment, Lady Callista appeared and declared that if the Duchess continued to scream, everyone around could go deaf. She asked the maids to leave them alone so she could talk to the Duchess in private. The little girl thought she also needed to leave the room, but her sister asked the girl to stay. Since Harper was the second princess of the Lupern house and the rightful owner of this room, she had to decide for herself when she left. The sister said that if someone tries to send the girl away, it doesn't mean that she should listen to everyone. The ladies sat down to talk, and the Duchess could not believe that Callista had gone so far as to ignore her own mother. Clarice replied that the Duchess was deeply mistaken because her mother was alive and well in the Ritra house, but the Duchess had no children of her own. Clarice screamed. Was this why Callista took all her maids without asking permission? She wanted to know where the lady had sent Salia, but the mistress did not understand why she was asking about the missing maid. The Duchess was outraged by Callista's behavior, as if she had already become the head of this house, and all this time she considered herself the mistress. Callista knew where to hit the Duchess and asked why she had conspired with the senior council. The lady said that Aramis may seem indifferent, but he always valued family, and recently a very dark story happened with her younger sister. She warned the Duchess that Aramis was now downstairs and talking to someone, and perhaps he is talking to the very person that the lady has been looking for a long time. After her words, the Duchess seemed to be stunned and held her breath, and genuine fear could be seen in her eyes. Callista warned that anyone bearing the Evans name would be kicked off the estate. She also sternly declared that the Duchess should under no circumstances ever boldly enter the young lady's room again. And if the Duchess interrupts little Harper's meal even once more, she will be severely punished. Callista promised to make sure that the Duchess and the rest of the maids also disappeared forever. The sister looked at the girl with a tender gaze and admitted that she had been through a lot during these days. Harper didn't understand what this all meant, because just recently her life was completely different. Maids, furniture, and clothes turned out to be the price for saving Lady Vtori, who fell into the clutches of villains. But that was not all, and the sister thoughtfully presented the little girl with a delicious strawberry dessert. Callista admitted that helping the baby was expensive, so she was going to thank her sister gradually. And only thanks to this little girl many remained alive, although no one even suspected that something like this could happen. Harper knew her sister had never liked to be in debt, but she was being too generous now. And the girl even wondered if she really just wanted to pay her off quickly and get rid of her forever. But these thoughts were just references to a past life, and at that moment someone knocked on the door. The door of the room opened and 3 knights entered, and the little girl completely stopped raising what was happening. 3 knights stood right at the threshold of her room and greeted the ladies with respect. Callista admitted that, judging by what happened at the banquet, the little girl clearly needs a bodyguard. Sister asked to choose one, and candidate number 1 was Noel White of the Second Knights, who could perform puppet shows. The second candidate was an excellent player of musical instruments and a master of martial arts. The third candidate asked to be chosen because he was ready to read fairy tales to the girl every night. The little girl had never had anything like this before, and she wondered if this was how they chose bodyguards. Callista asked if she didn't like the 3. Maybe Sawyer would be a good fit, as he could knit, much to the girl's surprise. The maid Gina could knit too, and now Harper didn't understand, and before she had told her to beware of Callista. The sister personally recommended candidate Sawyer. The young man said that he was even ready to hand over the post of commander to the younger one, if only to protect the little lady. It seems the lady was impressed by how Sawyer put a stop to Lewis's actions, and after that she began to treat him differently. But these were not all the knights, and another candidate with luxurious purple hair approached the girl. This young man's name was Theon, and of all the knights he was the most embarrassed. The knight had many brothers and sisters, so he was used to taking care of children, and said that if the little girl chose him, he would do his best to serve her well. The knight was very young and had only recently joined the First Knightly Order. But this young man had already proven himself worthy. He was very dexterous and skillful, but it was still difficult to adapt, and therefore he turned out to be too quiet. Harper thought. His name sounded very familiar, and the knights could not believe that the young lady would choose him. The little girl tried to remember what happened in her past life in order to get at least some kind of answer. She remembered in her past life she had no doubt seen Zion once, and instead of shining in public, he was a master in the shadows. After leaving the Lupernian order, he created the largest intelligence guild in the empire, became involved in the power struggle between the monarchs, selling and buying information, and was eventually eliminated by Callista because he knew too much. At the last moment, he managed to help his subordinates escape, sacrificing himself. Harper understood that it was very difficult to resist her sister and Aramis, but the young man succeeded for a long time. The sister asked the little girl if she didn't like anyone, she could find new candidates. But all this time, Harper was simply trying to make a difficult choice. And her answer was unexpected, because she chose Mr. Zion. The young man was so surprised, and he certainly did not expect that out of all the great knights she would choose him. He fell to his knees before the little girl and, with tears in his eyes, thanked the young lady, promising to serve her faithfully and truly all his life. That same day, Harper had a lesson in studying magic, and Theon happily greeted the girl. And for some reason, he called the little girl Señorita again, and this word made her want to fall through the ground. Harper asked to be called by her old name, but the butler said he couldn't do that. The young man admitted that many noble persons would like to see him as their vassal, and when the little girl grows up, she will understand how valuable it is to have him under her command. Harper didn't care at all and only dreamed of escaping from home alive and well. She moved ahead of Theon, but no matter how hard she tried, he still quickly caught up with her. Theon fully expected that the young lady would not take this lightly, so he prepared something for her. It was a special project that was supposed to help Lady Lupern become rich, and Theon was getting ready to begin the presentation. After analyzing her habits and preferences, the butler realized that Harper valued money and a quiet life over power. That's why he wrote up a business plan in her name and handed Harper a thick package. Now the heroine understood why Klein always had a headache because of Theon in life, because this young man really was a genius. After reading the document, the girl exclaimed, "This is simply amazing, and it was incredible how he even came up with such an idea." Holding an important paper in his hands, the butler smiled and asked if the young woman was ready to become his señorita. He bowed, and Harper admitted that she would be glad to cooperate, becoming his mistress. The app was too good to pass up, and Theon was set to begin implementing it after getting approval from Vtori. Harper read the business plan carefully and even suggested in one place that a different approach might be better. The butler was surprised and could not believe where the little lady had learned this. A satisfied smile appeared on Harper's face because she had just been praised by an incredible genius. The girl was studying on her own, and soon she found herself with a book in her hands that she couldn't open. Apparently, some magician left a magic book that wouldn't open. Theon had given the book as homework, but Harper had no idea how to even open it. Callista approached her sister and informed her that if she continued to try to open the book like that, she would not succeed. The lady picked up the magic textbook and, holding it with one hand, looked carefully at the cover. To open the book, mana was needed, and now the duel between the book and Callista had begun. Harper expected a magical battle. The miracle did not happen, and Callista slammed the book on the table with all her might, so loudly that it could be heard throughout the entire palace. The little girl expected her sister to use her magical power, but she chose a completely different way. She banged the book on the table several times and said that it was better to just hit it hard if it didn't work. Finally, the book opened, and at that moment, Harper realized that her sister and Aramis were incredibly similar. The little girl said she was trying to study genealogy, and the butler asked her to find out about the royal family and other aristocrats. The sister admitted that this was an important quality for a lady and asked what Harper had already learned. Callista sat down with her at the table and read that the current emperor was Irek, and his wife, the empress, was called Litany. The little girl listened attentively to the information that her sister was telling, because it was very important. Between the emperor and empress was a crown prince named Klein Bayan, and seeing his photo in the textbook, the little girl immediately remembered that she had seen him in a past life. It was Klein who insisted that the girl should not set foot on the land he had forbidden, ordering her to smile or pretend to be dead. In the end, the prince wanted the lady to be buried exactly where he would allow. Callista said that Klein was cruel and domineering, and it was better not to get involved with such a person. The empress still hushed him up for his dirty deeds, but sooner or later the girl was sure that he would drive himself into a corner. Many ladies fell in love with the prince because he was incredibly handsome, despite his terrible character. In this life, the boy had not yet lost his left eye, and Harper realized that he probably wasn't that bad yet. Callista asked the girl if she knew any other information about the rulers of the empire. The little girl thought about it. In fact, she knew a lot of things, but she was trying to figure out what would be best to tell her sister. She remembered that the empress had hidden and raised the second prince in secret due to his poor health, and this boy was named Killian. In his past life, he died at the age of 11 from the claws of a monster while hunting with Prince Klein. Then Klein dealt with the monster at the cost of his eye. This act repeated the legend of the founders of the empire, and since then he was formed by the loyalty of the founder. With such support, it was obvious that he would inherit the imperial throne, and in the second, the principle was no longer remembered. But now Harper wondered if the second prince had died back then. Perhaps it could have prevented Klein from becoming the ruler. The little girl was even scared by her thoughts that perhaps the second prince could resist Klein without any support. The sister continued to talk about the rulers of the empire, and at one point the girl looked at the lady who would kill her in the future. Now there was a completely different relationship between them, and Callista protected and helped her sister. And the heroine would be happy if another path and opportunity to avoid dire situations opened up for them. The maid walked down a dark corridor at night in the palace, the moonlight barely penetrating through the high windows, casting strange shadows on the tapestries. The maid, who had worked here for many years, knew every corner, every creaky floorboard. She walked into one door. A little boy was sitting in the room reading books. The maid asked why he was not sleeping at such a time. This boy was the second prince named Killian, and every evening he studied a huge number of books. The nanny asked if the prince had gotten carried away with his books again, but she had never heard of anyone learning martial arts from books. Killian had no other choice because his mother did not allow him to hire teachers, and she constantly sent him medicine and also tried in every possible way to protect the boy from the outside world. After these medications, Killian always coughed up blood and couldn't even move a single part of his body. He told the nanny about this, and she promised that she would try to secretly throw out all the medicines. The boy said that he was going to leave the palace soon and not tell his mother anything about it. If the Empress found out, everything would be too bad, and the boy understood that she would do everything to stop him, and that was why he decided to run away. Killian was born a bastard and was expected to die with his mother, and the Empress took him under her wing. Each time she said that in the palace, only she cared for the boy, but the young man had a completely different opinion. He was sure that if he tried to escape, the Empress would try to find him in any corner of the empire. The Empress needed only one thing: that the boy should never get out of her control. The nanny was scared. The Empress is capable of many things, and she can even poison the knights who are guarding the boy. Killian had been thinking for a long time about how he could escape from the Empress without being punished. He might even be able to go back, since he would have nowhere to hide anyway. But in this case, he will only be able to find out one thing: who is his real enemy. Vtori greeted Harper with a smile, and she heard that brother Theon gave her a lot of homework. The little girl boasted that she had been memorizing the genealogies of all the noble families for 3 days in a row, and it was simply a crazy family tree. During this time, Vtori also prepared almost everything, and in her hands she held a strange glass bottle. She still had a couple of experiments to do, but she already thought that the medicine from the yellow-green herbs would soon be ready. The lady finished the job quite quickly, and the little girl was incredibly happy that the girl was helping her. Vtori warned that the festival would soon begin, and the young lady had probably already been given a lot of chocolate. The Asserting festival is a magical day when every resident of the empire gives sweets to someone special to them. At this time, residents confess their feelings to each other or exchange homemade sweets with neighbors and simply enjoy the holiday. But the butler warned in advance that the lady's frequent fainting spells were most likely caused by poor nutrition. So this time at the festival, he decided to confiscate all the sweets and asked the little girl to come back for them when she grew up. Lord Theon had strictly forbidden giving the girl chocolate, and Vtori understood that everyone was eager to give Harper some nice sweets. The little girl was already upset because she was incredibly looking forward to this day to try a lot of chocolate. Suddenly, she heard that he had left for a few days on urgent business, but he had already given strict orders to the entire staff. Theon had strictly forbidden the girl from having chocolate, and she realized that if she made the chocolate herself, it would definitely not count. With a sparkle in her eyes, she turned to her personal knight, Zion, and suggested that they head to the kitchen as quickly as possible. The kitchen has had a new chef, Chris, for some time now, but he admitted that it was unlikely to happen. The little girl tried to persuade him, but the cook refused because he had already received strict orders. He managed to get a handle on Harper. He was afraid that the girl would eat all the chocolate at once as soon as it was prepared. But the little girl was not going to give up so easily, declaring that she was not going to make chocolate for herself. Harper raised her hands up and exclaimed happily, the festival was coming soon and she wanted to give everyone the sweets she made. She said she was going to give chocolate to the maids, Theon, Sion, but in reality she wanted to give chocolate to you first. The cook's cheeks flushed and he asked if these were all the inhabitants of the palace, hinting at Lady Callista. As soon as he heard about the lady, he immediately reported that the girl should hurry, because a temporary assistant had recently arrived who would be useful. He said that at first the assistant was covered in bruises, he was punished and kicked out, but as soon as he took off the bandage, he began to run around the kitchen. The little girl thought of it when she heard about the bandage on her arm and immediately understood who they were talking about. Her guesses turned out to be correct, and the cook's assistant turned out to be a young man with whom she had already had a quarrel once. Looking at each other, the heroes were stunned. None of them could believe it, because they had managed to meet in the kitchen. Knight Theon immediately rushed to the young lady's defense because this very youth was her enemy. He calmly swung his sword with all his might right in front of the young man's face, who definitely didn't expect such a turn of events. Theon remembered very well the situation when this man was too rude to the lady and promised to count to 3 so that he could show respect. Harper thought Theon was just following her around in silence, but it turns out he was pretty good at defense. After all, even Callista herself recognized Theon's skills, and now he demanded that the young man immediately apologize to the young lady for the previous situation. The assistant cook asked what the hell he was talking about, but he knew Theon very well, as he had once done to her. And after that, the young man still dared to appear at the estate, despite that situation. He had long since been punished for the past, and now his whole body trembled in front of the knight. But Theon was not going to back down, and angrily declared that the master's time was up, but he did not have time to apologize. It was the same knight who had framed the young lady, but now, standing there covered in bruises, he truly repented. Harper had long since forgiven him and politely asked him to teach her how to make the most delicious chocolate. And this is probably what Theon meant when he said he was great with children. Lewis explained very well how to make chocolate and suggested that the lady first pour the chocolate powder into a bowl. After all, if even cold-blooded Callista spared him, perhaps he really had finally changed. Lewis was surprisingly very polite, and even Harper noticed a strong change in the behavior of the once impudent enemy. Lewis knew how to make different types of dessert chocolate. He explained every little detail, and it was really impressive. The young man behaved calmly and even praised the little lady because she really did a great job. Harper was surprised because all she did was spill flour all over the kitchen. All this time, the personal knight was in the kitchen, and the lady politely asked him to leave for a minute. Lewis was scared, wondering if he had messed up again, but the young lady asked him to stop. He was shaking so much that it made her feel awkward, and she asked him not to lie and not to pretend to be remorseful. Lewis looked at Harper with surprised eyes because all this time he really tried very hard to be good. Maybe Harper was right and Lewis really wasn't doing very well, so she wanted to talk about it in person. But the young man still stood his ground and admitted that he truly regretted that situation. While working in the kitchen to punish Callista, he realized how terrible he had been all this time, and admitted that he shouldn't have treated Harper like that because of someone else's chatter. Lewis dropped to one knee in front of the girl and apologized sincerely from the bottom of his heart. Theon returned, but the young man said that he did not expect forgiveness from him at all, and simply wanted to thank him for intervening then. Harper had simply not wanted Uncle Sawyer to leave, but nevertheless this was the first time someone had sincerely apologized to her. Finally, the heroine felt what it was like to accept true repentance, and as a token of gratitude, Lewis gave the girl chocolate. He held in his hands an incredibly beautiful dessert with pieces of strawberries, and strong emotions raged in the little girl's heart. After a long time spent in the kitchen, Harper prepared a basket full of beautiful and delicious chocolate. And the first one to get a cute, sweet gift was her favorite maid, Jenna. But she didn't even immediately understand and thought that the basket contained fertilizer for garden plants. Harper said it wasn't fertilizer at all, but chocolate that she made herself. Be that as it may, the little girl was uncomfortable admitting it, and she understood why Jenna was behaving this way. As soon as the maid unwrapped the wrapper, she saw a strangely shaped chocolate, and Harper was surprised because she had cut it neatly as she had been taught. The chocolate in the maid's hands looked like a strange brown lump, which really didn't look like chocolate at all. Harper didn't want the maid to get such an ugly gift, so she asked for another one. In the other box, the chocolate looked absolutely amazing, and Jenna was surprised. She had never seen such beautiful chocolate before. It was Lewis's own chocolate, but Harper was planning to give hers away and then eat his gift. But since she still had quite a lot of chocolate left, she decided to give hers away so as not to embarrass herself. The little girl was very upset because she had cut the chocolate so badly that it looked like brown lumps. She had to give away the chocolates Lewis made to avoid looking embarrassed in front of others. She offered everyone to choose chocolate from the basket, and even Vtori, whom she trusted so much, chose a package that was not hers. In the end, the girl was left with only that ugly, oddly shaped chocolate that she had cut poorly. The little girl collapsed on the sofa in the living room from fatigue, not understanding why she had started all this. She was very upset, and at that moment one of the maids approached her, asking to talk. But the young lady did not want to talk to anyone, completely unaware that Lady Callista herself had come to her. She jumped up from the sofa and ran towards her sister to ask if something had happened. Callista looked at the girl and remained silent, and her appearance was too unexpected for the little girl. Harper asked if her sister really wanted to talk to her about something, since she definitely came for a reason. Callista said she heard from Chef Chris that the young lady had been in the kitchen for a long time. He told how the young lady painstakingly spent several hours preparing chocolate, especially for her sister. The little girl even suspected that the chef would tell everything so quickly, and she really asked to make chocolate for the lady. That is, cold-blooded Callista, who never cared about the baby, now came for that chocolate herself. It was nothing like her sister, but she was standing right in front of her, waiting to receive her gift. Harper couldn't speak, and Callista asked if the girl hadn't been able to make chocolate. Of course, now she had to give the gift, but looking into her basket, Harper realized that only that terrible chocolate was left. She took the bundle in her hands and realized that under no circumstances should she give such a horror to her sister. But before she had time to think about it, the lady herself took her gift from the girl's hands. Looking fearfully into her sister's eyes, Harper knew that as soon as she unwrapped it, she would be in shock. Callista actually began to slowly open the package to see what kind of chocolate her sister had made. She looked at the small bundle in her hands and thanked the girl, and the little girl had never heard such words before. At that moment, Harper felt warm inside, and her sister was truly grateful for the little gift. She held it carefully in her hands, and it was the first gift the little girl gave Callista. The lady admitted that since she had received a gift, she should definitely thank Harper. She gave the girl a cute little pink box with a bow and said that Theon would be back tomorrow and that she should go to bed early. The little girl did not expect to receive a gift from her sister, who had always treated her with indifference, but now she saw in Callista a completely different person, caring and considerate. The young lady thought she wanted to say thank you, but she did not expect a gift from her sister. In any case, she had a cute little box in her hands, and it was definitely chocolate. And since this gift was from the lady, the butler definitely wouldn't be able to take it away, and the little girl's efforts weren't in vain, even though it all started modestly. She happily put the delicious round chocolate candy into her mouth, but the next second she felt something strange in her mouth. Inside the chocolate was a precious medallion that shimmered with all shades of blue and blue. It was a rare jewel in the form of a pendant, and the little girl could not believe that her sister had prepared it especially for her. Given her relationship with her sister, Harper assumed it was probably just a cheap trinket for children, but the chocolate turned out to be very tasty. Lady Callista, refined and graceful as a porcelain figurine, sat down at a wrought iron table, immersed in the shade of spreading trees. In her hands she held a package tied with a lavender silk ribbon, a chocolate gift from her little sister, Harper. Callista's heart filled with warmth. She closed her eyes, enjoying every moment. She took out a strangely shaped chocolate candy, and at that moment the door swung open and Aramis appeared. He saw a strange candy in the lady's hands and hit it with all his might, shouting, "This could be dangerous." Aramis literally knocked the candy out of the fragile fingers and the girl in a second, who immediately flew into the bushes. Callista never expected that this could happen, and only a light breeze swayed her hair. Aramis looked at the flying candy and asked what happened to the lady because she was always careful. He admitted that he felt an unkind aura from afar, but as soon as he looked at the lady, he was overcome with intense fear. Strong magic raged in the lady's hands, and the lady admitted that it was a gift from her sister, which she made especially for her. Callista became angry in just a few seconds, because the chocolate had just disappeared from her hands. Aramis laughed and asked if she had simply taken and believed her sister, since anyone would have understood that it was poison. The lady got really angry and literally destroyed the concrete fence of the garden with one movement. The lady admitted that it had been a long time since she and Aramis had fought each other and asked the knight to draw his sword. The knight understood perfectly well that the lady would not stand on ceremony with him, and he belligerently drew his sword. The next second, the rest of the weapons swung into the air and ended up literally under the clouds. Aramis didn't even notice how the sword flew out of his hands and landed safely in the bushes. The young man smiled and declared that the duel was over, and Callista, as usual, had won again. The lady sighed heavily, because now it was completely useless to talk to Aramis, and he had already done everything. The young man warned that if the lady wanted desserts, he could bring them himself. Callista promised to eat dessert later. Aramis was surprised that she hadn't tried it yet. The lady quickly calmed down and asked the knight what he thought about one question. She asked what sister or brother meant, but Aramis was surprised, because it was not in Callista's nature to ask such vague questions. She asked him to simply answer, and the young man expressed his opinion, "These are people you can't get rid of, no matter how much you want to." He started talking about Vtori, claiming that they were kind to other people, but it was as if they didn't tolerate you at all. The young man even suggested that perhaps the lady meant those who smile sweetly in the face, but behind their back there are intrigues. But the girl admitted that today she gave Harper the tears of an esper. It was about that very exclusive, expensive decoration, a relic, and the knight couldn't even believe his ears. This pendant was a memento from the Duke of Litra. He received it from his mother, and it was a family heirloom. Aramis knew that this pendant even contained diamonds of the highest quality, and even enchanted by a magician. But this was the only thing Callista had that was suitable as a gift for his little sister. The knight asked if the lady was sure of what she had done, since not long ago she had said that keeping her distance was the best solution. Indeed, these were the words of a girl, and just recently she held this opinion. But lately, everything seemed to have changed, and she felt that she was beginning to treat her sister differently. Callista was sure that if she continued to ignore Harper, she might have lost even more. But if it weren't for little Harper, she wouldn't have been able to save Vtori on that terrible day. As soon as the heroine thought about this, she imagined the possible consequences and was horrified. If Harper hadn't shown up in time, Vtori would definitely be dead, as would everyone else, and it would hardly have ended in bloodshed. It was strange, but it seemed to the lady that with all these actions, she was protecting her. It was the first time Aramis had heard Callista be so sincere and respectful towards the little girl. It was known to all that Lady Harper might one day lay claim to the title of elder sister. But Callista was sure that if she wanted to, she wouldn't be hiding in the mansion, and Harper didn't need that at all. Others might try to use her, but as long as the two of them were alive, the fight for the inheritance would never end, and Callista had only one goal. Aramis noticed that the lady had been behaving rather strangely lately, and he decided to ask if something had changed. Sighing, the lady said quietly that she herself did not understand what had happened to her during this time. In Theon's hands was a small glass jar filled with a liquid of a strange iridescent color. He looked at the contents with particular attention. The liquid was absolutely colorless and had no odor. Harper thought such a subjugation was possible to create, but Vtori used top-notch ingredients. She said that this medicine was especially effective against poisons, and finally with its help they would be able to help many people. The little girl was touched, because this is exactly what she expected from Vtori, who was capable of a lot. The lady asked if the young lady was going to sell it, but Harper had other plans. She was going to simply give the medicine to those who needed it, but she was going to keep the recipe a secret. Theon said it was necessary to reduce people's fear of the yellow-green grass, but no one would take it if they knew what the medicine was made of. The young man understood that it was very dangerous to keep something like this on himself, and the more profitable the medicine became, the more people would try to get their hands on it. Up until this point, Harper and Theon had been of one mind, but his plan was to use the herb to gain an advantage in negotiations. Vtori was surprised that the young man was really going to import raw materials first and make money from it. But as it turned out, Harper offered an easier way to make money and found a rather shortcut. The little girl happily told about her grand plan, and she had long been planning to buy land, the very land that connects the Empire and Carne, which in the future will become the main trade route. Now it was just a forest overgrown with thorns, so it was worth mere pennies, and Harper knew it very well. Carne, where the yellow-green grass comes from, is known for its steep, rocky mountains, and among these mountains there is one flat place, a forest of thorny bushes between two cliffs. No one dared to set foot there, but if Harper wanted to, she could get rid of the thorns and the animals, and she had already figured out how to do it. The butler studied the documents and reported that only a little money was missing to completely drink up this forest. They were 1 gold coin short, and Harper didn't want everything to go down the drain over a small coin. The seller said that payment was due today, and he warned that he could not wait long. Harper asked if it was impossible to get the palace funding for the next month in advance, but Theon had already figured out some points and confidently stated that this would not work and the girl would be refused. Harper tried to persuade the butler to give her 1 gold coin, but the young man categorically refused. The young lady was wondering who she could borrow 1 coin from, and that person had to be higher in rank than her. The butler looked at Harper smiling, and it seemed to him that there was such a person in the palace after all. This person turned out to be her sister, Callista, to whom Harper immediately went to the office with a strange request. The little girl had never asked for money before, and she felt too excited. But she had no choice at all until her sister asked her to state her request clearly and distinctly. Harper looked at her with pleading eyes and asked her to lend her 1 gold coin. Callista was surprised because Harper had never asked her for a single coin before. She promised to return it in the following months and offered to write a promissory note and also provide collateral. But Callista was more interested in why the little girl needed money so urgently she had to tell about buying land. Harper said the land wasn't worth 1 gold piece. It was worth much more, but she was only 1 coin short. Callista insisted that at least 10 coins were needed for the investment to pay off in some way. She had the air of someone trying to figure out how to explain this to the young lady more clearly, and the investment would prove unsuccessful. She even offered to invest with her, and decided to tell about the business plan drawn up by the butler. Callista carefully read the document about the trade route between the Empire and Carne, and to purchase this land, it was necessary to give 8 coins. But what surprised her most was the point about expected income, which turned out to be completely unrealistic. After all, from the purchase of cheap land, the little girl was going to receive 10,000 gold every day. After talking with her sister, the lady looked thoughtfully out the window for a long time. Even Aramis noticed that Callista looked too puzzled today, and he wanted to find out what was wrong. He understood that the situation was connected with little Harper, and he had seen her literally a couple of minutes ago. She walked out of her sister's office and was simply beaming with happiness, holding 1 gold coin in her hands. Callista admitted that it was she who gave her sister the money, but Aramis wondered if the lady had really decided to allocate the funds for pocket expenses. The lady told about the investment, and the plan conceived by her sister's little head seemed worthwhile to her. Just recently, Aramis himself said that in Egard, the elders will try to use Harper. In fact, the lady had been thinking about this for a long time, but she only wanted happiness for her little sister. Callista decided that perhaps this girl was not one of those who could be used so easily, and even the elders would not succeed. Harper told the butler the good news, and she just couldn't let go of the grand business plan. She was pleased even just to look at him, and it didn't matter at all that part of the land would belong to her sister. Suddenly, Harper noticed that for some reason Zion seemed very upset today, and perhaps something had happened to him. She asked if everything was all right with the knight, because his face was like a gloomy cloud. Harper asked to tell him if anything was bothering the young master, and she really wanted to help him. The little girl already considered herself an expert in matters of murder, escape, and all that, and she really wanted to know the truth. She was confident that she could solve his problem and raise the level of trust, but suddenly Zion started talking about a love problem. He had a girlfriend that he really liked, but he hadn't seen her for a long time and was worried. Zion told about a girl named Iris, the daughter of the owner of the tavern where he previously worked. And now the young man was experiencing strong emotions because she even often said that she would rename it correctly in her honor. The knight said that he once did not confess his feelings, and now he regrets it very much. Harper thought in a past life she had already heard of a tavern called Iris. But this was no ordinary tavern, but rather a base for Zion's spy network, which he would organize in the future. The tavern owner, a young lady named Iris, was then known as his right hand. Zion was currently living in the Duke's mansion thanks to Milady, but if he hadn't adapted here, he would have returned to the capital to see her. And only now Harper finally realized that Zion's fate had changed because of her, and it was completely unclear what would happen to the future master of spycraft. Harper could not allow herself to radically change the hero's fate under any circumstances, and asked the young man to immediately go to Iris right now. Zion needed to protect the young lady, and she even offered to go to the capital so that he could go with her. The young man did not expect the little girl to act sensibly, and he could not believe that all this was really for his sake. Harper looked at her personal bodyguard with a serious look, declaring that he must definitely win Iris's heart. She waved her hand and proudly declared that she would help Zion solve his love problem beautifully. Maid Jenna picked out a beautiful outfit for the little girl and asked her not to go far from her knight because the capital was too crowded. Theon gave Zion a magical artifact in case of emergency if something happened. The artifact was imbued with rare and valuable magic and was to be used in times of danger. Much had changed since the heroine had been reborn into a new life, but today was her first real exit outside the palace. In her previous life, she knew this city like the back of her hand, but after her reincarnation, she had never been here. Harper and his personal bodyguard entered the magical portal to travel to the capital. No matter how many times the young lady passed through it, she always experienced a strange sensation. Within seconds, they had moved to a completely different place, and Harper was sure it was time to begin an important mission. The passage through the magical portal was not quite normal, and this time Zion felt a little sick. He asked for forgiveness, and it was the first time he used the portal, so the young man felt very nauseous. Nausea after teleportation is no joke, and the first time Harper also dumped everything out, right on Klein's head. That's exactly how it was, and after catching his breath a little, Zion was finally ready to go. He held the young lady's hand, and together they stopped near the doors of that very tavern. Knowing that Zion was going to be rejected, Harper felt a little sorry for the kind young man, and she was already thinking in advance how she would have to console him. She decided to stay outside, since children were not allowed in the tavern, and the little girl was not so tactless as to follow the young man while he confessed his feelings. Zion suggested leaving the girl with his younger brother named Zane, and he definitely couldn't leave her here alone. A young man approached the knight who was twice his size, was shy, and certainly did not meet the standards of the young ladies. He asked his younger brother to take care of my lady, but for some reason he seemed much more reliable than Zion. Zion held a beautiful bouquet in his hands with trembling hands, saying that he would definitely return soon. Despite the knight's words, the little girl understood that the conversation would most likely drag on, and wished him luck. She knew that after Iris's refusal, he would most likely stay in the tavern and soon realize that nothing spreads faster than rumors, and this was truly the ideal refuge. Once she settles in there, like she did in her past life, everything will move forward and Harper's plan will begin to come to life. The little girl never thought that she would return to the imperial capital voluntarily because she did not have the warmest memories of this place. All this was thanks to Duke Klein, whom she had met here in the past. Harper and Zane were walking through the shopping arcades, and the girl's attention was drawn to bright ribbons with lace and beads. These ribbons were so beautiful that the little girl wanted to buy one to remember this day. Her eye was immediately drawn to the cute blue ribbon, which seemed to stand out from all the others. As soon as she picked up this ribbon, she realized that it would be incredibly suitable for her sister. But the next second, the little girl threw the ribbon away, screaming, not understanding what she was talking about, because Callista would become her enemy in the future. Looking at this ribbon, the little girl could not cope with her trepidation, because it would really look beautiful on her sister's hair. So despite all her doubts, Harper still bought a cute blue ribbon with the remaining money. Theon had said that a good relationship with a business partner was important, and now she was trying to justify her actions with exactly that. All this time, Zion's younger brother carefully followed the girl and asked if she wanted to see anything else interesting. The capital was crowded, and the little girl was incredibly enjoying the walk, but suddenly she saw someone in the crowd. She certainly couldn't be mistaken, and noticing the knight in the blue cloak, she stopped dead in her tracks. That man was the commander of the Empire's Second Knightly Order, a cold-blooded youth named Gale Osmond. He was the one who dragged the heroine back to the Duke when she tried to escape his tyranny. Harper noticed that the young man looked very strange and was definitely looking for someone in the crowd. The girl was overcome with terrible memories, and she thought with horror that Klein had already started looking for her. She asked Zane to return to the tavern as soon as possible, but he noticed that the lady looked scared. She ran as fast as she could and asked to tell Zion that she would be in a certain alley. Harper knew she just needed to hide and wait for her personal bodyguard to arrive to remain unnoticed. She tried to run as far as possible, but saw that several people were already following her. They were Gale's men, the Knights of the Empire, and they were right on her heels. Harper managed to run into the alley and hide behind some wooden boxes, and holding her breath, she watched the strangers. She only had time to hear that the knights had gone in the other direction, and it was obvious that they were looking for her. Having decided to climb between the wooden boxes, the little girl did not notice how she dropped something important to herself. She closed her eyes and just prayed that no one would even think of looking for her in the narrow gap between the boxes. But it turned out to be much more cramped here than she thought, and at that moment the little girl realized that she was not hiding here alone. Imagine her surprise when she saw a boy with bright green eyes and black hair in front of her. Harper stopped breathing out of surprise, because right in front of her was someone she didn't expect to see. Their meeting could not have been a coincidence, and the young gentleman asked in fear who she was. Harper jumped away from the young gentleman and asked for forgiveness, and in fact she was in a hurry and did not notice him at all. She couldn't even imagine that there would be someone else in this strange place, but she saw the boy with her own eyes. Harper hadn't met many people in her life, but looking into the young gentleman's eyes, she had never seen such beauty. She was especially impressed by these dark green eyes, the color of a huge emerald, which looked straight into the soul. It was as if there was a whole mysterious forest hidden in those eyes, and Harper couldn't tear herself away from his gaze. The heroes fell silent because each of them was probably hiding from someone here, but at that moment footsteps were heard. At that very moment they stopped talking, because the approaching steps could not mean anything good. It was the knight who had already looked around the room, shouting that there was no one here. The boy's whole body was shaking, and Harper continued to cover his mouth with her hand so that he would not make a sound. But suddenly she saw scarlet drops of blood on her little hand, and probably the boy was wounded. She noticed a serious wound on his body, and she understood that it needed to be treated, or better yet, to find a doctor. The young gentleman asked why the stranger decided to help him, since they had only known each other for a minute. It was Harper who hid him from Gale's men, and the young master confessed that he had recently escaped from the imperial palace. The only time the Empire's knights comb the alleys is when someone escapes from the confinement of the Klein or the Empress. This means that the knights of the Empire were not pursuing Harper, but their target was this unknown boy. Harper understood that the boy needed her help now, and she offered to go with her. The young master was about to go back, but the girl screamed. It was not easy to escape from the palace, and he definitely should not go back there. There was still a man in the palace who had raised Killian, and if he didn't return, he would be harmed, but now he knew his enemies by sight. This boy was still just a child, but his eyes clearly reflected echoes of the horror he had experienced. The young gentleman must have seen a lot already, since he decided to run away just like the heroine did in the past. Harper knew he had to get back without getting caught by Gale's men. Otherwise, the young gentleman may face big troubles, and not only he, but also his loved ones may suffer. The boy couldn't believe how the girl could know all this, and she just asked him to accompany him. The young gentleman was in a very difficult situation, and he felt that her help was not something he should refuse. He didn't think twice and gave her his hand, hoping that it would be her that would save him. They sat in the alley for a while longer to make sure the knights had left. Harper asked the boy to leave the alley and turn right onto the main street, and walk straight along it to the wall of the imperial palace. She told him that to the right of the outer tower there was a small hole in the wall, and the guards rarely noticed it, so he wouldn't be caught if he returned that way. The young master was very surprised, because even he did not know about the existence of the secret passage. The heroine decided to give her name, and happily admitted that she was a member of the Lupern family. Killian must have known the girl's name, because his face changed as soon as he heard Harper's name. The little girl warned him that if one day he decided that he wanted to run away forever, he could come to her. And now, even outside the palace, the young master has a friend who knows him and is always ready to help. Harper admitted that despite all the difficulties, even if he gets lonely, he shouldn't think that he is alone in this life, because she was always ready to think about him and to help him in any difficult moment. All this time, Mr. Zion was looking for the girl in the alleys of the capital and was very worried. As soon as she heard his voice, she immediately realized that she needed to go back, and as soon as possible. The young lady managed to help the boy avoid falling into the hands of the knight, and he realized that he now had a real friend named Harper. Killian looked at the girl with respect and asked her to be careful in the future, and little Harper knew that this meeting was not just a coincidence, and they would have to meet again in the future. Zion had already turned over every box and bucket in every corner of the alleys, hoping to finally find my lady. Harper heard his voice and ran up to the knight, smiling and asking him not to worry and to forgive her. The knight was very worried. While he was confessing his feelings, something could happen to the girl and he felt guilty. There were tears in the young man's eyes. He and Iris had talked about a lot of things, and it seemed they got along well as colleagues. Harper was glad that Simon was okay, which meant they had been discussing the Intelligence Guild all this time. Now, finally, everything would return to normal, but at that moment the little girl felt a strong excitement and realized that something was wrong. Right in front of them, the Knights of the Empire appeared, stating that it seemed like there was definitely no one in this alley just a minute ago. The young men calmly asked the young lady and her bodyguard to go with them. Zion was outraged by what nonsense they were talking, appearing out of nowhere with an absurd demand. He tried his best to protect the girl and said that the knight clearly did not understand who they were talking to, but the little girl asked Zion to shut up. The girl couldn't reveal her identity now, so as not to attract unnecessary attention to both of them, because the Intelligence Guild had not yet been created. Zion took out his sword and warned the knights that he refused their stupid offer. No one would dare take the baby. But the knights were too self-confident, and the commander warned that the young man had no right to decide this. He gave the order to his assistants to immediately seize the strangers. The situation was getting too bad, and now more than ever, they need help to avoid being captured. At that moment, Zion rushed into the attack, and with one deft swing of his sword, the knights flew in different directions. Harper hoped that everything would work out, but Zion had already dared to behave insolently with the Knights of the Empire. He grabbed the girl abruptly and asked for forgiveness in advance, but now it was important for him to save her. Zion turned out to be much stronger, and even two knights were unable to defeat him, and the commander stood nearby, calling them fools. The young man held the girl tightly and ran at the speed of light from the main commander of the knightly squad. As they ran, Harper remembered the pendant Theon had given her, and now was the perfect opportunity. The heroes were in great danger, and Zion didn't think twice before pressing the magic pendant. Zion pressed the magic pendant, and everything was illuminated with a bright blue light, as if the sky had collapsed onto the earth. The light was shining in his eyes, forcing him to close his eyes, but Zion felt the energy released by the pendant spreading around him. The air was filled with the smell of ozone and magical energy, burning the nostrils and making the heart beat faster. The magic pendant transported the heroes to another place, and Harper woke up lying on the grass while Zion lay nearby and tried to come to his senses. The little girl tried to catch her breath, and the first thing she asked was if everything was okay with her bodyguard. But Zion still had the same problem. He still felt sick in the magical portal, and the young man simply felt nauseous. The little girl was sure that they were now safe, but for some reason the Knight of the Empire appeared next to them again. The young man was incredibly angry. He screamed at how the strangers dared to disobey his order. He swore that he was ready to kill them both with his own hands, and the little girl realized that Gale had indeed followed them to this place. Gale had already drawn his sword and angrily declared that they would try to escape again, but this time they would fail. The look of a true villain was reflected in the cold blade of the sword, but Harper was not going to give up either. The sword, freed from his grip, flew into the air, a scarlet aura enveloping the blade, causing it to glow with an ominous ruby light. Gale tried to hold on to the weapon, summoning all his strength and experience, but the red aura only grew stronger, absorbing his resistance like sand. The knight Aramis came to the rescue, and it was his magical power that helped deal with the villain. Gale asked if the knight had come from Muller's house, and Aramis wondered if he really knew him. Gale had indeed seen him before, and even dared to call him a brat. One day, Gale was invited to the Royal Academy as a one-day tutor, and the young man was not going to forget how Aramis once treated him. Aramis actually remembered that about 5 years ago, a guy showed up and started to act arrogant in front of the whole school, challenging everyone to a duel. It was Gale who boasted that knights who had not completed their training would never be able to defeat him, and he was eventually carried out of the arena in tears. In any case, Aramis was not happy that the impudent fellow had to wave a naked sword on Lupern territory. Besides, he knew perfectly well that Gale had dragged young Harper into everything that was happening. Gale said he found the girl's behavior suspicious and was only acting within his authority. He said with glee that he was the commander of the Imperial Knights, appointed by His Majesty the Emperor, and no one could disobey him. Aramis warned Gale once again to look around more carefully and finally understand where he was. And he probably hasn't yet realized that he is in the Duchy of Lupern and that his mistress is Callista herself. Aramis stated that Gale probably didn't understand what she was doing, since he had just encroached on something that was dear to her. As soon as the little girl heard these words, tears of joy appeared in her huge eyes, and they were talking specifically about her. Knowing the future perfectly well, Harper thought this was complete nonsense, and was there really anything in this world that her sister valued? Gale continued to shout, calling Aramis a traitor who dared to disobey the imperial order. Aramis decided it was time to stop the idle chatter and punched Gale right in the face with all his might. His blow was powerful and incredibly accurate, and the next second Gale was lying on the grass, groaning in severe pain. Gale was sure it was a backhanded blow, and he was not at all prepared for this action from a true knight. But Aramis replied that Gale was not even worthy of him drawing his sword and fighting on equal terms. He opened a magical portal and grabbed Gale by the collar to finally get rid of him. Despite the knight's pleas to stop, Aramis opened a magical portal and was ready to throw Gale out. He threw the young man with all his might right into the center of the magical portal and asked him to get out as quickly as possible. Harper laughed because Aramis had just thrown Gale right out of the duchy with one hand. All this time she stood silently and watched what was happening and how brave Aramis easily figured it out. After Gale finally disappeared into the magical portal, the knight addressed her directly. The lady was already looking for her sister, and she was the first to learn that an unpleasant incident had occurred in the imperial castle. The little girl said that the commander of the royal knights attacked her with a sword, and Zion bravely defended her. Callista realized that sending Aramis was the only right decision, and this incident had dragged on for too long. Aramis held Gale's sword in his hands and immediately brought it straight to the lady's office. She looked closely at his sword and remembered that Aramis had definitely met Gale before. The lady asked if this was not the one who lost to Aramis at the academy. Her husband was surprised that the lady remembered this. In fact, from the outside, it was a huge failure, and Aramis's peers talked about it for a long time. Callista warned Zion that leaving a trusted person unaccompanied is unacceptable, and the young man should thank Harper because she stood up for him. Zion was deeply grateful for the generosity of both ladies, but little Harper was not too embarrassed that the knight had gotten into trouble because of her. After this, the lady let the knights go, but asked her little sister to stay, and the little girl was afraid that she would also receive a reprimand. Right now, she just wanted Zion not to leave, because now was the time to protect her here and now. It was still hard for the girl to be alone with her sister, and seeing such a reserved person in anger was the worst thing that could happen. But Callista leaned towards the little girl and only quietly asked why she decided to do this. The lady was sure that it was very dangerous for a child like her to wander alone without her accompanying knight, and Callista still wanted to know what exactly forced the girl to leave her bodyguard. It didn't sound like a scolding, and when the little girl realized it, she said she just wanted to try walking alone. It was her first time outside the mansion, and Harper just wanted to look at the clothing stores and fruit stands. And then she remembered that she had bought a cute ribbon as a gift for her sister, and she wanted to give it to her. The little girl put her hand in her pocket, and she was sure that she put the paper bag with the ribbon there. After rummaging through 2 pockets, the young lady realized with horror that the little bag with the blue ribbon had disappeared without a trace. Her pockets were indeed empty, and the little girl realized that she might have lost a precious gift. She really wanted to give this cute ribbon to her sister, but now she could do absolutely nothing. Harper asked her sister for forgiveness and admitted that she seemed to have lost that very ribbon on the way. The heroine came to the capital for the first time, but after this trip she experienced only suffering. Because of Gale, all the most unpleasant moments from her past life surfaced, and she remembered with horror her life with the Duke. And that sweet blue ribbon was the only warm memory of that terrible day, but now it has disappeared without a trace. Large, transparent tears flowed down her cheeks, and her whole little body shook with grief. Harper imagined how happy Callista would be, how her eyes would sparkle, how the soft blue ribbon would play in her curls. It was a gift with which she wanted to express all her love, but now the ribbon was gone. While in the body of a child, the little girl could not cope with her emotions, and she was afraid that if her sister saw her like this, she would definitely hate her. Callista's heart sank at the sight of those tears. She knew how easy it was to hurt a child's soul, especially when it came to gifts. She understood that the ribbon was not just a piece of fabric, it was a symbol of the love that Harper wanted to give, and Callista admitted that it was enough for her that the little girl was simply thinking about her. Callista gently wiped the tears from little Harper's eyes and hugged her sister to calm her down. Her slender fingers slid softly through the girl's hair, whispering words of comfort. And Harper, having calmed down a little, nodded, looking trustingly at her older sister, finding comfort and support in her words. Sometimes the most valuable thing people can give each other is love and attention, not material things. That night, little Harper couldn't sleep, thinking about how her sister had soothed her so carefully, the scene playing over and over in her mind. In the darkness of the room, Harper could clearly see Callista's face, her gentle eyes full of sympathy and understanding. Harper couldn't understand if her sister had a secret agenda, because in the future she would become her worst enemy. The one who had once tried to kill her with her determination was now genuinely worried about her sister. Thoughts of the missing ribbon gradually faded into the background. Words of comfort echoed in the little head, and if something so wonderful turned out to be true, it would be wonderful. Not only little Harper couldn't sleep today, but the nanny at the Imperial Palace was also eagerly awaiting Killian's return. Finally, the boy's silhouette appeared on the threshold, and the nanny was incredibly happy that the young man had returned alive and well. There was a wound on the boy's face, and the nanny immediately became worried that something terrible had happened. Killian admitted that he had simply fallen by accident, but the nanny could not believe it, thinking that the knights had actually drawn their swords against him. The boy told how Gale had not hesitated to attack him, but now his curiosity was fully satisfied. Suddenly, the young gentleman asked how common the name Lupern was. The nanny immediately realized that this was the name of the ducal house, and as far as she knew, no one other than members of the family could bear this surname. This means that the girl who saved his life really was from the ducal family. The boy held that same blue ribbon in his hands, and looking at the night sky, he whispered her name. Now Killian had at least one person outside the estate who knew about him, and that was enough for the young master. And little Harper was sitting in her room at that moment, also looking at the night sky and remembering the amazing meeting. The knights of the Imperial detachment had already reported what had happened, and there was unrest in the Imperial court this morning. Deafening loud screams came from the office, so loud that the maids were trembling with fear. The knight reported that Sir Osmond had indeed found His Highness the Second Prince, but it seemed that someone from the Lupern family had interfered with him. The young man shouted throughout the palace how these people dared to interfere in the affairs of the imperial family. The first prince of the Klein Empire was incredibly angry, and he had no intention of letting the ducal house get away with this. He ordered to report everything that happened and not to miss a single detail, but Osmond, pursuing suspicious individuals, jumped into the portal. Somehow he had found himself on the estate grounds if he had encountered Sir Aramis, but even in the Imperial Palace it was known how Aramis, at the age of 12, had made Osmond suffer during a duel. Callista appeared in the office of the Imperial Palace and declared that it was difficult to call it a duel, and the knight was then routed to smithereens. The enraged gentleman shouted, who dared interrupt him, and there definitely shouldn't have been anyone in his office. Lady Callista, sword in hand, visited the Imperial Palace to personally speak with His Highness. The lady bowed cordially and stated her name, Lady Callista of the Ducal House of Lupern. Judging by the way the young man's eyes flashed angrily, he knew this girl very well, saying her name through clenched teeth. A dark, gloomy energy flared up between the heroes at lightning speed, and the young man was clearly not happy to see his mistress in the Imperial Palace. He shouted at the maids who dared to enter someone into the palace without his permission, but one of the maids had reported this earlier. The lady was indignant. His Highness began to shout at the slightest incident, and probably for this reason he did not hear anything. The young man continued to be angry, not understanding where this fragile girl got so much insolence from. She came with a sword that the knight's commander had left on the territory of her house, and asked to discuss a matter in private. Everyone left the office, and the young man warned that the lady would have to listen to him, because she had no idea how angry the Empress would be because of her servant's behavior. Callista was not going to tolerate such blatant disrespect, and grabbing the young man by the collar, she asked him to shut up immediately. His Highness clearly did not expect the girl to grab him right by the collar, and at that moment she seemed simply crazy. The lady had already warned the prince more than once not to allow his knights to roam wherever they wanted and create complete chaos. She was unhappy. The knights invaded the territory of the ducal house, while the prince assured her that she should not get involved in this, whom the imperial knights arrest within the capital. In his opinion, it was just one child and some stupid knight who dared to disobey the order. As soon as the lady heard these words, she became even more furious, because it was not just a child that was being talked about, but a lady from the house of Lupern. His Highness was also surprised, because Gale must have gone crazy to decide to go against the lady. But the point was that the knight did not go against her, but against a defenseless little girl. This fool had brazenly gone against her younger sister named Harper, and even the young man had not expected to hear such a thing. He once heard about little Harper from his mother. She said that a daughter was born in the Lupern house from a servant, and then she said that a child of such low birth carries ducal blood, and one day she might be useful. But the young man did not even expect that the lady herself would call her her younger sister. With all her anger, Callista warned that if the boy was too stupid to understand, he should simply remember, and if it happened again, the sword would be driven into his flesh. The Empress arrived in the young gentleman's room, and the nanny was informed of the arrival of Her Majesty and the Marquise of Lusaic. But instead of saying hello, the Empress brazenly walked up and pushed the nanny right in the shoulder. The unexpected blow caused the girl to fall to the floor, and the young gentleman rushed to her aid, because this was his only relative. He knew very well that the Empress had always been rude to her servants, but now she was behaving too insolently. Every time she came, the boy was prepared for the fact that anything could be expected from this lady. Her very appearance was terrifying. The Empress's appearance was not repulsive, on the contrary, her features were correct and thin, like those of a marble statue. But in his cold eyes, it seemed, eternal anger was splashing, and his thin lips, pursed in a contemptuous grimace, brought to mind thoughts of unspoken curses. Next to the Empress stood her faithful companion, the Marquis, who was a relative on her mother's side. The Empress arrived and demanded an explanation from the boy as to the meaning of his outrageous act. Litany asked the young man to explain how he dared to disobey her order and go outside the palace. She was even ready to spank the boy, but that was not all. And in the alley where he was hiding, the second daughter of Lupern turned out to be, and his existence almost became known to the whole world. The Empress assured him that she treated the young gentleman like a son, and he had no idea how insidious and dangerous the nobility were. The litany warned that if they found out who his real mother was, they would want to destroy him, and such is the fate of a traitorous family. Every time the boy heard her voice, a chill ran down his spine from the terrible, hypocritical words. The Empress always said that in the entire imperial palace, only she cares for the young master, and only her house can be trusted. She warned the boy to sit quietly and stay in the shadows from now on, and that would be better for everyone. Gale managed to tell the Empress everything. Killian used a magical barrier to escape from the palace. The Marquis was surprised that this little child could control mana, but they hadn't taught him anything and were sure that the boy couldn't even read properly. But not only did he elude the knights, he also used a strong magical aura, despite the fact that they had been giving him drugs to suppress it all this time. The Empress warned the Marquis that this must not happen again, by accident, and this child must not be seen outside the palace or even inside it. She just wanted Killian to simply exist, breathe, and be unharmed, and nothing more. The Empress considered the boy a shadow meant to offset Klein's brilliance, and she had dedicated the last 11 years to this. But it seemed the boy was growing up too quickly, and the Empress was preparing to carry out a long-planned, selfish plan. Killian's death was meant to be a legend, but his life had to be erased from everyone's memory, and that was the meaning of his existence. Little Harper woke up early this morning in a great mood and walked around the palace with her maid. Suddenly, Knight Sion, whom she had not seen since that day, appeared in the corridor on her way. A radiant smile played across the young man's face, and he joyfully wished the young lady good morning. Sion seemed to be in a great mood today, and the little girl asked if he was still dreaming about Iris. The young man could no longer remember the last time he had been depressed, but just recently he had burst into tears when Gina sang him a lullaby. Then the young man really became emotional, and that lullaby was about a squirrel and a rabbit who became friends. But now Iris's confession would be in the distant past for him, because people should live in the present and enjoy every moment. Harper realized that it seemed that a broken heart was best forgotten by new love, because Sion was already looking at the maid. She noticed that the knight was clearly looking with interest at the maid walking next to her, and the girl responded in kind. For little Harper, adult relationships have always been too confusing, because everything can be done much more simply. Today, the young lady was busy with invitations sent to the family by the capital's aristocrats. Theon thought that Sion would also be curious to read them. An invitation came from the family of Count Sattel, as well as from the Rosé trading group. He did seem interested, but Harper had one case she needed to investigate. She had told the knight about the strange rumor while she was in the capital, and now she needed to pique his interest. As soon as she said this, a spark of curiosity appeared in the young man's eyes, and he asked with interest what kind of rumor she had heard. The girl whispered in secret that they say that the northern Count Sattel has had an affair on the side, and many already know this. Despite the fact that the Count was married, he openly dated a famous opera singer. Sion thought about it and asked if the little girl was sure that everything was exactly like that, but Harper admitted that everyone was talking about it. She decided to find out Zion's opinion and asked him if he thought Count Sattel wanted a big divorce. The young man was sure that this was unlikely to be the case. The Count clearly did not need any extra problems, and especially not any ridiculous rumors. Sion called the rumors that Count Sattel was cheating on his wife a complete lie and was absolutely sure of it. The young man admitted that most of these rumors are clearly exaggerated, and this definitely cannot be true. Besides, he actually knew something about the Count and his wife. Sattel was known for passionately pursuing his bride even before the wedding. But when rumors spread so quickly and change his reputation overnight, it usually means someone was deliberately inflating them. Sion was sure that the Count had deliberately set everything up to provoke and hurt his wife, because she was the first to have a lover and began dating him in secret from her husband. Harper didn't even expect Sion to be so right, and this version was really plausible. And just now, the knight was able to quickly get to the bottom of the truth only through stupid rumors, and it was simply magnificent. The scandal with the Count was a hot topic even in the heroine's past life, when the Countess got tired of family life and cheated. Instead of making a scene, the Count began a high-profile affair with an opera star, choosing the most daring way to make his wife jealous. As a result, the Countess returned to her husband 6 months later, but due to the scandal, the Count had already lost all his fortune by that time. It wasn't until a year later that this became known, and to think that Sion had figured it out so quickly and Harper had underestimated his insight. The little girl was delighted. The young man got to the truth with so little information, and Sion was simply sensitive to gossip. He warned that if the girl was curious about something, she could just ask him, and he would find out everything in no time. And he was ready to help the little girl in any situation, because if it weren't for her, he would have been deprived of his knighthood long ago. It was Harper who had helped the knight escape punishment during their last sortie, so now he was ready to find out any information. Harper was incredibly happy and hugged her bodyguard, which she was very grateful to him for. After all, from now on, the little girl was going to turn to Sion for all the necessary information, without unnecessary ceremony. Harper decided to find out if any of the families who had sent the invitation were addicted to Asserting. The talk was about magic pills that were known among all the nobility of the empire. This drug was commonly used in gambling houses to deceive wealthy customers. Those who took the drug suffered from hallucinations and quickly lost self-control. People who took this drug were unable to break free from the cycle of gambling and ended up losing huge fortunes. According to Vtori's research, the yellow-green herb helped with the first symptoms of addiction. But there were many more of these people than it seemed, and this plant could save them, so Harper decided to speed up her plans. Sion said he has a friend whom he suspects of being involved with the drug and also of being addicted to gambling. He picked up one invitation, and that person turned out to be the lost Count Rostian, about whom there were also many rumors. The little girl was surprised to hear this name, and she could not believe that Sion really meant the father of the current Earl. At one point, he suddenly became addicted to gambling, passed on the title to his son, and since then has never left the gambling house, ruining his family. As soon as the young man started talking about it, Harper realized that Sion was a real gossip and knew too much information. But now his knowledge turned out to be very useful for her, because if it weren't for this young man, it would have been difficult for her to learn anything. Harper decided to thank Sion by getting him a delicious chocolate chip cookie. The young man was surprised, and Milady asked to accept payment for his information, promising to always pay generously for useful information. Sion smiled. At first he couldn't accept the cookies, but as it turned out, they were the same cookies that the head maid baked. Harper stated that, by the way, this cookie was the last one and Sion should definitely take it. As soon as the young man learned that these cookies were from that very maid, he accepted such value. While the young man was rejoicing over his reward, the little girl was trying to understand what the Rostian Count's family was involved in. And now she was sure that the Count needed to wait a little, and she would definitely be able to save his family no matter what it cost her. The lady threw her chair back in rage and screamed at the top of her voice like an angry goddess casting her lightning bolts down on an unfortunate mortal. The lady in the emerald dress was angry. The young man was unbearable while he asked his dear to calm down. In the spacious living room, her voice sounded threatening, filling the air with hatred and contempt directed at the young man standing before her, as if at the sights of a merciless executioner. She screamed that she could still turn a blind eye to everything because of her father's illness, but she couldn't understand how he managed to arrange a banquet in their difficult situation. The talk was about the silk business that her father was involved in, but people were sure that the young man was only creating new problems. After all, if it weren't for his father, he certainly wouldn't have become addicted to gambling, and they wouldn't be experiencing such difficulties now. The former count, a born businessman, expanded the family silk business and made a huge fortune from it. But the luxurious life ended, and one day he succumbed to the temptation of an envious nobleman and became a frequent guest of gambling houses. This deprived the Count of all self-control. He gambled away his entire fortune, passed on his title to his son, and one day fell ill with health problems. At that moment, the lady was going to simply close the business and quietly move to their estate, but everything turned out completely differently. She was sure that if her father had been of sound mind, it would not have come to this, and now their family was in a critical situation. While she was shouting loudly at the young man, she didn't even notice how uninvited guests appeared in their house. Young little Harper, along with the butler Theon, arrived at this house to finally help the Earl's family. The lady did not understand what was happening here, and as soon as she saw the strangers, she became very scared. When she saw Theon, she realized that this was the brilliant accountant who succeeded in every task he took on. One day, the butler didn't even listen when she found him begging him to help their family deal with their problems. But now he himself showed up, and the young man greeted Theon, offering to sit down and discuss everything in detail. The young lady greeted the Count's family warmly, since she was definitely seeing them for the first time in her life. Looking at the baby, the hero was completely perplexed as to who she was, and only one thought came to mind: that this little girl is the butler's daughter, but it is not at all clear why they came together. Theon introduced himself so that no one would have any misunderstandings, and was ready to tell about Harper's baby. Standing in a cute pink dress, the young milady bowed and said she was very glad to meet you. The young lady had given her a fairly well-known name in the Empire, but Harper was not one to rest on the laurels of a famous family name. As soon as she said her name, the Countess was stunned, because in front of her stood a girl from a ducal family. The butler introduced the youngest daughter of the famous ducal house of Lupern, and there is not a single person in the Empire who does not know this family. The young man confessed that he thought he had come to talk about past affairs, but the essence of his appearance was probably different. Of course, it was unlikely that a miracle would come to save the ruined Count's family, whose condition was simply terrible. And Harper wondered if they really expected a genius with incredible intuition to come along and just lead them out of their crisis. Harper said she came to offer the help their family clearly needed. Theon summed it up. Everything was just as the young lady said, and they came to offer their help. The Countess was incredibly surprised. She certainly could not have imagined that a lady from the ducal house would come to help them. In her hands, the little girl held a bottle with a clear liquid, and it was the very medicine that Vtori had developed. The heroes looked at each other and did not understand anything at all, and they only wanted to know how this jar could help them. The young man asked the butler what it all meant. They simply needed money to get out of the crisis. Harper said the previous Earl was a talented businessman, and one day he achieved great success. 3 years ago, he retired from his business due to illness. The little girl knew everything, but they could not believe how the child knew about her father's condition, because everyone knew the business went bankrupt, but they tried to keep his illness a secret. The young lady warned that she knew a way to cure the former Count's illness, which caused huge problems. Holding the treasured bottle in her hands, Harper asked again if they really wanted the ducal family to help them. The pink sunset over the imperial palace painted the spires and towers in soft, watercolor-like tones. The nanny picked up the pieces of the broken vase and was glad that the meeting with the Empress ended exactly like that. Killian asked if the nanny really knew a lot about noble families and if she was willing to share the truth. In the work of a maid, one can inevitably hear a lot, and indeed the nanny knew a few things. But she didn't understand why the boy suddenly became interested, asking if she by any chance knew about the upcoming meetings from the capital. He needed information about a business advertisement that the ducal house of Lupern would be interested in. The nearest event is a banquet hosted by the Rostian family, but word is that their business is in trouble and they are pinning their hopes on the event. Killian knew this was his only chance to meet little Harper again, and it was unlikely that something like this would happen again. After meeting the Empress, the young master thought only about this, and this girl became a ray of hope for him in a dark world. Killian told the nanny that he was also going to this banquet to meet his friend. The nanny understood that if His Highness ran away again, he would be in serious trouble, and if last time the boy was severely reprimanded, this time the Empress could indeed do much worse. But Killian had already firmly decided to meet one person, and was just about to try out a new route. He didn't give a damn about the actions of the Empress, who would definitely be incredibly angry after this act. The only thing that reminded Killian of little Harper was the blue ribbon he found after their first meeting. And all this time he carefully kept it in his closet and thought about their next imminent meeting. The boy was incredibly grateful for the rescue, and looking at the cute ribbon, he promised that this time he would come to her himself. A few days later, a luxurious celebration took place in Count Rostian's banquet hall, where all the nobility gathered. Last year, the Count's family held a similar banquet, but this time the guests noticed a completely different atmosphere. The county's financial situation had deteriorated beyond recognition compared to last year, and this was the main topic of discussion. Rumor has it that the previous Earl was addicted to gambling, and no one could understand what he was thinking when he handed over the title in such a state. People were whispering. The information came from the Intelligence Guild, and it seemed to be reliable information about the Count's financial problems happening precisely because of this. The family was doomed, and the only thing that could save them was if the Count suddenly got back on his feet and returned to the affairs of the house. But given his condition, this sounded too implausible, and the room fell silent as the Earl's family appeared on the red carpet. As soon as they left, the aristocrats immediately stopped whispering and turned their attention to the Count and Countess. The young man expressed endless gratitude to everyone who visited the estate and accepted the invitation to the ball. The Count admitted, as everyone already knows, that in recent years he had been managing the family business instead of his father, who was unwell. However, he now admitted that it was time to give up control of the business and focus on running the estate. He was going to retire completely. This was good news for the guild, but many were sure that their mansion would now be useless. The young man said that today they had invited someone who would from now on take over full management of the Count's family's business. The news was too shocking, and no one could believe that a person had been found who would take up business, but suddenly the young man started talking about his father. The previous Count Rostian himself, about whom many terrifying rumors had already been circulating, appeared before the guests. The aristocrats could not believe it. The former count actually came out to them in good health, but earlier they said that he had fallen ill due to health reasons. The guests were shocked. This definitely couldn't be happening, and the man, addicted to gambling and almost dying, now walked confidently on his own 2 feet. The Count addressed the guests, declaring that he seemed to have heard all the absurd rumors circulating about him. The guests smiled into the Count's eyes, and some were embarrassed to admit it, because rumors about him had indeed spread very quickly. However, now the video of the man in full health, one could say that these rumors were completely false, but unexpectedly the Count confessed to his addiction. He said that just a few days ago he had been completely absorbed by it, unable to walk or even think normally, and at that time his hands were mechanically shuffling imaginary cards in the air. But recently, a noble lady presented him with medicine, and although the treatment was still ongoing, the Count came here to express his gratitude as a member of the Count's family. In the crowd of guests stood a little girl in a soft blue dress, and the Count addressed her specifically. The little girl and the butler came out in front of the guests, and the Count, kneeling down, asked what the medicine that saved him was made of. It was little Harper's finest hour, and she was not at all worried, confident of her victory. No one could believe it. The young lady cured the previous Count, and the aristocrats immediately recognized the baby from the ducal family. Harper didn't even pay attention, although people were whispering behind her back she was that illegitimate girl. The Count admitted that there were still many people like him in the gambling houses who were in dire need of help. All these people are poor souls who have become victims of someone's intrigues, addicted to games, and lost the meaning of their lives. The Count confessed to all the aristocrats that he wanted to share the miracle he had received with all the people who needed it so much. He asked little Harper to sell more of the drug, and he was willing to pay a fortune right then and there. The ingredients for the medicine were not at all expensive, and in fact it was a very common plant in some regions. The little girl said that the miracle medicine was made from the root of a yellow-green grass. As soon as the girl told about this, the guests did not believe her words, and it turned out to be that very devilish herb. Even the Count himself did not believe it, but Theon confirmed that the petals of the yellow-green grass were poisonous, but the root, on the contrary, had medicinal properties. The butler said he, too, had once suffered from an illness caused by these petals, and some of the guests here know his medical history. And now Theon was going to prove to the aristocrats the truth of his words, so that they could see it with their own eyes. The young man put the roots of a well-known poisonous herb into his mouth, swallowed them, and the guests waited in amazement to see how it would end. But the young man was quite healthy and continued to talk to the aristocrats, declaring that since then he no longer coughed or choked, and all thanks to the root of the yellow-green grass. In addition, studies have shown that it neutralizes 12 other poisons, and none of the guests thought that the root could be so useful. For Theon, this was a kind of presentation of a new medicine, and the aristocrats were already thinking about getting the plant first at any cost and making a fortune. The Count assumed that the yellow-green herb was a known poisonous plant that only grew in the south of Karne, and that to trade it, one would have to cross the dangerous Rocky Mountains. He guessed that it must be necessary to secure a supply route in advance, which was why little Harper had come with a wet message. The girl didn't need this at all, and she refused to provide the supply route. Theon assured that anyone who wished could go to Karne to collect the yellow-green herb themselves, and there was a shortcut to do so. Between those mountains there was a fairly wide plain. The owner of the land generously allowed the inhabitants of the empire to use it. Anyone who wanted to could go there, but there was a reasonable small fee for travel. The Count did not believe that such land really existed and asked to bring its owner immediately, but the butler admitted that the owner was right there. The Count knew all the guests and did not understand whether the owner had come straight to the banquet and not informed him. He looked around, hoping to find the very owner, but at that moment, little Harper asked the Count to pay attention to her. She quietly said that she was the owner, and the Count did not immediately believe her words. In front of him stood a very small girl who, in his opinion, certainly could not take over the lands. But the little girl confessed that it was she who had recently bought these lands so that the yellow root of the green grass would be available to every resident of the empire. The Count certainly didn't expect this because he was going to see an adult but not an 8-year-old girl. The little girl smiled and told that just recently, together with her sister Callista, they bought the land on which the miraculous root grows. The Count asked if the ladies were not planning to monopolize the land, but were planning to simply allow several trading guilds to use it. After all, this means that duties will be collected only at the average rates accepted on the empire's trade routes. The aristocrats could not believe the incredible plan that the little girl came up with. Many were outraged, claiming that their fathers had been in very close relations with the Duke of Lupern. The aristocrats began to shout in unison, each trying to say that the ducal house should remember them. Everyone wanted to get to these lands first, but Harper said that the road is not yet fully developed, and she plans to give priority to the squad of monster hunters and lumberjacks. Some men had defeated monsters with their bare hands in the past and shouted about it, while some just wanted to give money. The little girl did not expect such a stir, and only silently looked at the rebellious aristocrats. Winking at the girl, the butler admitted that their plan had been grandiose and that it had worked perfectly. The influence of this little girl turned out to be far greater than that of most famous families. The butler was busy with the paperwork, and soon he informed Harper that almost everything was ready. In his hands, he held a copy of the contract, signed by the Count himself, and this meant that the plan had been carried out to the fullest. Harper had no doubts about the butler's authority, and as expected of Theon, he approached everything responsibly. Everything went smoothly, from the assignment of Vtori to conduct research to determine the exact medicinal properties of the yellow-green herb. until a colorless medicine was created so that the former count could take it without discomfort, and all this was made possible thanks to the advice of the butler. Now, the thorny paths along the trade route will be carefully cleared, and the count's shaky business will be brought back to life. Theon invited the girl to take a walk through the fragrant garden. The little girl happily looked at the beautiful roses, and she wanted to see the same flowers in their garden. As she walked, rejoicing in their shared victory, she suddenly heard children's voices nearby. 3 boys were making fun of one boy, laughing that he didn't even have a gardener, and some of the flowers in the garden had completely wilted. The boy was nervous and asked the guys to stop, because this was the place that his mother had lovingly arranged. When the conversation turned to a duel, the impudent boy became indignant. Oscar doesn't even know how to run properly and will be as useless for the rest of his life as his father. Oscar was the son of Count Rostian. Little Harper knew that right away, but to say that because of the family's collapse was too cruel even for a child. Oscar took out a small knife and shouted at the children to take back their words immediately. The boy laughed when he saw the dagger with a protective spell, and he knew that it was impossible to hurt people with such a thing. He took out a child's sword and was going to teach the boy a lesson, although he was the only one to blame in this story. The sharp blade flashed in his hands, and the boy asked Oscar to apologize, and only in this case was he ready to forgive him. Oscar didn't understand why he should apologize, since these children were the ones who started insulting him first, and they also insulted his family. He held the sword with trembling hands and did not understand what kind of apology was being discussed, but at that moment he heard the girl's voice. Little Harper loudly declared that they should be the ones asking for forgiveness, and Oscar should forgive them. The young rude man called Little Harper an impudent girl who dared to interfere in a conversation that did not concern her. He asked if her family had also fallen apart or if she just liked Oscar, but it was definitely not about romance now. Next to the impudent man stood a girl named Jenna Rosé, and her mother controlled the entire Rosette Guild. The main bully was the son of Baron Riedel, named Elliot, and the instigator turned out to be his brother, Alvin. Little Harper decided to give her name and loudly declared that she came from a ducal family. But the girl was overcome with doubts. Now she needed to introduce herself as someone's daughter, but if she mentioned her father, it would not sound impressive. The only person she could truly be proud of was her older sister, Callista Lupern, whose name she said with pride. All the children were silent for a moment, and the name Lupern was known not only to the adults. They looked at each other and began to whisper, wondering if it was really that girl in front of them from the Duke's family. And at that moment, the little girl did not expect that the children would call her that very fake lady who was the daughter of a servant. Alvin laughed. The fake lady was paired with a beggar, and in his opinion, they were just the perfect couple. The little girl was indignant, and now Baron Riedel should worry, because the former Count Rostian had regained his health. Harper claimed the Baron had stepped in boldly when the Earl's family had wavered in taking over the silk business, but the investors had quickly defected to the Earl's family. Jenna asked the young lady if she had seen the former Count and where she got this information. But as soon as Alvin heard about this, he realized that Baron Riedel could soon find himself in big trouble. Alvin swung his dagger and screamed, "This definitely can't be happening," and asked the girl to take her words back. Harper looked at the training blade with the spell and asked the boy what he could do with it. After all, even if he hit him, he would not be able to kill, and she proudly declared that she was a false lady and had absolutely nothing to fear. He considered her words to be impudence and could not contain his angry emotions, swinging his blade at the girl. For Harper, it could have been just one punch, no matter if it was fake or real. The Baron would never protect his son who had injured an 8-year-old girl, and compared to her past life, it was nothing. She closed her eyes but suddenly heard a strange sound, feeling as if absolutely nothing had happened. Harper opened her eyes and saw the same boy with emerald eyes who had just blocked her with his body and received a blow from Alvin. She saw the forest green eyes again and couldn't believe that this was really reality and not a magical dream. He stood between Harper and Alvin like an impenetrable wall. Ready to protect her from further attacks, Alvin did not expect that anyone would dare to oppose him, and in this action, there was a wisdom that surpassed Killian's young age.